9:42 p.m. on a rain-drenched Tuesday night. The century-old brick building on Millbrook's Main Street stood defiant against the Connecticut storm, its weathered facade a testament to bygone eras. Jack Thompson's scarred hands gripped his trusty toolbox, a companion through 3 decades of fixing other people's problems. The weight of it, familiar and reassuring, matched the heaviness that had settled in his chest since Ellen's passing 2 years ago. The building superintendent had called about an electrical emergency in the basement. At 63, Jack should have been home with Ben, not answering late-night service calls. But widowers with 8-year-old sons couldn't afford to turn down work. His military-grade flashlight, a relic from his SEAL days, cut through the basement darkness with clinical precision. 30 years of combat and electrical work had taught him to notice details others missed. Water pooling near the northeast corner. Unusual scratch marks on the service door. The faint scent of expensive perfume that had no business being in this dank space. Jack froze, his body instantly reverting to the alert stillness that had kept him alive through 3 tours of duty. There, a soft, ragged breathing from behind the ancient boiler. Someone trying desperately to remain undetected. "I'm armed," he lied, voice pitched low and authoritative. "Come out slowly with your hands where I can see them." A moment of silence, then movement in the shadows. The beam found her huddled against the cold stone wall. Even disheveled, she was striking. Golden hair fell across the torn shoulder of what had once been an expensive blazer. Her porcelain skin, marred by a thin scratch along one cheekbone, seemed almost luminescent in his flashlight's beam. But it was her eyes that gave Jack pause. Brilliant blue wide with a mixture of fear and calculation. The eyes of someone weighing options, assessing threats. Not a drug addict, not a common thief. This woman was something else entirely. "Please," she whispered, her cultured voice barely audible above the storm. "They might still be looking for me." Jack's weathered features remained impassive, but his mind raced through tactical assessments. The building's security cameras disabled according to the super. The storm that had cleared the streets. The desperation in those blue eyes. Every instinct honed through decades of reading people and situations told him this was trouble. The kind of man his age had no business getting involved with. Yet something in her gaze triggered the same protective instinct that had driven him through smoke-filled buildings in hostile territories. "Who's looking for you?" he asked, maintaining distance, keeping his light angled to assess for weapons. "I can't," she began, then winced as she shifted position, revealing a bloodied scrape along her forearm. "I shouldn't involve anyone else." Jack's mouth tightened into a thin line. He'd heard similar words from wounded comrades too proud to admit they needed extraction. His calloused fingers reached for his phone, and the woman tensed. "Not the police," she pleaded, a new urgency in her voice. "They won't believe me. They're already—" She stopped herself, swallowing whatever explanation had nearly escaped. Outside, thunder cracked with military precision, and the ancient lights flickered ominously. Jack made his decision with the same decisive clarity that had defined his career. "Can you walk?" he asked, already slipping off his worn denim jacket. Relief flooded her face as she nodded, accepting his jacket with trembling hands that bore no calluses, hands that had never known manual labor. Jack helped her to her feet, noting how she favored her right ankle in the practiced way she assessed the exit routes. This woman was trained not in combat, but in something equally demanding. "I'm Jack," he offered, keeping his voice neutral as he guided her toward the stairs. "Sophie," she replied after a moment's hesitation that told him it wasn't her real name. The storm outside had intensified to a biblical deluge, sheets of rain hammering against the building's arched windows. Jack's pickup truck sat alone in the parking lot, a battered sentinel in the downpour. As he helped Sophie into the passenger seat, he caught the glint of something metallic slipping back into her torn blazer pocket. A data drive, not a weapon. Interesting. The truck's heater wheezed reluctantly to life, pushing back against the damp chill that had settled into their bones. Sophie clutched his jacket tighter around her shoulders, her gaze constantly sweeping the rain-obscured surroundings. Jack recognized the behavior from his own post-deployment months, the hyper-vigilance of someone who knew they were being hunted. "Millbrook doesn't have a hotel," he stated flatly, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes focused on the rain-slicked street ahead. "Hospital's 20 miles south." Sophie's shoulders tensed beneath his jacket. "No hospitals," she said quietly. "No records." Jack nodded, once decision already made. Ellen would have understood. She always had. "I've got a spare room," he said, putting the truck in gear, "and a first aid kit that puts most emergency rooms to shame." For the first time, a genuine smile ghosted across Sophie's face. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying more weight than such simple syllables should bear. Jack drove through the deserted streets of Millbrook with the practiced ease of someone who had known these roads for decades. His weathered hands guided the steering wheel with the same steady precision he applied to electrical wiring and the raising of his son. The wipers beat a hypnotic rhythm against the windshield, occasionally losing their battle against the torrential downpour. "My son will be asleep," Jack said, breaking the silence as they turned onto Elm Street. "He's 8. Name's Ben." Sophie nodded, absorbing this information with the same careful attention she'd given to their surroundings. "You're a good father," she observed softly, though how she could know this remained unspoken between them. Jack's small two-story colonial came into view, porch light, burning like a beacon through the storm. A silent promise he always kept for Ben, light in darkness, no matter what. "Wait here," he instructed, parking and retrieving his service pistol from beneath the seat, the one possession from his military days he'd never surrendered. Sophie's eyes widened slightly at the weapon, but she offered no comment as Jack stepped into the rain to secure the perimeter. Old habits, necessary ones. Ben was asleep on the living room couch when they entered, his small frame curled protectively around the worn teddy bear Ellen had given him on his 4th birthday. The television murmured quietly some documentary about sea creatures that had lulled the boy to sleep. A framed photograph sat on the coffee table beside him. Jack in his dress blues, Ellen radiant in her simple white dress, baby Ben cradled between them. Their last family photo before Ellen's diagnosis. Sophie's breath caught when she saw the picture, her fingers instinctively moving to her throat, where a thin gold chain disappeared beneath her blouse. Jack cataloged the reaction, but said nothing as he gently lifted his son. "Dad," Ben mumbled, stirring slightly. "It's okay, sailor," Jack whispered, using the endearment that connected them to a naval heritage spanning 3 generations. "Just getting you to bed." "Didn't mean to fall asleep," Ben protested weakly, even as his eyes drifted closed again. "Was waiting for you." Jack's throat tightened as he carried his son up the narrow staircase to his bedroom, decorated with model ships and scientific posters, a careful balance between Jack's military past and Ellen's scientific passions. He tucked Ben in with practiced movements, calloused fingers, brushing sandy brown hair from the boy's forehead. "Love you, Dad," Ben murmured, already drifting back to sleep. "Love you too, son," Jack replied, the words still difficult to say aloud since Ellen's passing had left him sole guardian of his heart's greatest treasure. When Jack returned downstairs, he found Sophie standing exactly where he'd left her, as if afraid to disturb even the air in this shrine to domestic tranquility. She'd removed his jacket, folding it carefully over the back of a chair, revealing the full extent of her torn designer blouse and the bruises beginning to form along her forearm. "First aid kit's in the kitchen," Jack said, gesturing for her to follow. "Then we talk." The kitchen bore Ellen's touches everywhere, from the hand-painted tiles above the sink to the collection of scientific journals still stacked neatly on the corner shelf. Jack moved efficiently through the space, retrieving a comprehensive medical kit from a high cabinet. His hands, which could rewire complex electrical systems or field strip a weapon in seconds, were surprisingly gentle as he cleaned Sophie's wounds. "Military training?" she asked, wincing slightly as he applied antiseptic to the scrape on her arm. Jack nodded. "Navy SEAL, retired 15 years ago." He worked methodically, giving each injury the precise attention it required. "Your turn. What's a woman wearing $3,000 worth of clothing doing hiding in a basement in Millbrook, Connecticut?" Sophie's eyes widened slightly at his estimate. "Good eye." "I noticed details," Jack replied flatly. "Survival habit. Like how you checked all exit points when we entered. Or how that's not a standard corporate ID badge outline in your pocket." A small, impressed smile crossed Sophie's face before disappearing beneath the weight of whatever burden she carried. "I'm in financial services," she admitted, each word carefully measured. "Investment management for high-net-worth clients." "Wall Street," Jack supplied, applying a bandage with practiced efficiency. "Yes." Sophie's gaze dropped to her manicured hands, now marred with dirt and small cuts. "I discovered something I shouldn't have. About my partner, Marcus Reed." Jack remained silent, allowing her space to continue as he moved to her other injuries. Fraud on a massive scale, she explained, her voice hardening. Hundreds of millions in client funds redirected through shell companies. When I confronted him with evidence, she gestured to her current state. His security team tried to ensure I wouldn't be a problem. Jack studied her face, searching for tells of deception he'd learned to recognize during interrogations. Why not go to the authorities? Marcus has connections. Sophie replied, bitterness edging her voice. Federal judges, regulators, local police. By the time I realized how deep it went, he'd already framed me as the mastermind. There's a warrant for my arrest while he plays whistleblower. The kitchen fell silent except for the storm raging outside and the gentle ticking of the clock Ellen had hung above the doorway. Jack finished his ministrations, packing away the medical supplies with military precision. His mind worked through the tactical assessment, threat level, security concerns, impact on Ben. You'll stay in the guest room tonight, he decided, his tone making it clear this was a temporary arrangement. We'll figure out next steps in the morning. Relief flooded Sophie's face. Thank you. I know you have no reason to. I'm not doing it for you, Jack interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. Storm's too bad to send anyone back out. But I need to be clear, my son comes first. If this puts him at risk, you're gone, no discussion. Sophie nodded, accepting his terms. I understand completely. Jack showed her to the guest room, untouched since Ellen's sister had visited for the funeral. He set fresh towels on the bed and pointed out the bathroom across the hall. Lock your door, he advised. Old habit, but a good one. Sleep eluded Jack that night. He lay in his bed, still on Ellen's side after 2 years unable to reclaim his original territory, listening to the storm's fury gradually subside. His service weapon rested on the nightstand, closer than it had been in years. The photograph on his dresser showed Ellen in her laboratory coat, brilliant and vibrant, at 38 before cancer had stolen her from them. Her eyes, so like Ben's, seemed to question his judgment in bringing a stranger into their home. Not much choice, Elle, he whispered to the darkness. You'd have done the same. Morning arrived with unexpected sounds from the kitchen, the gentle clatter of dishes, the whistle of the kettle, the soft humming of a melody Jack didn't recognize. He moved silently down the hallway, pausing to check on Ben, still asleep, clutching his teddy bear, before descending the stairs with the measured steps of someone approaching potential danger. He found Sophie standing at his stove, her golden hair now clean and pulled back in a simple ponytail. She'd somehow transformed Ellen's old clothes left in the guest room dresser into something that looked almost elegant on her slender frame. The bruise on her cheekbone had darkened overnight, a violent contrast against her fair skin. Hope you don't mind, she said without turning, spatula moving with a practiced ease over the pancake batter. I thought breakfast might begin to repay your kindness. Jack leaned against the door frame, arms crossed over his chest. In the morning light, with the storm's chaos replaced by crisp autumn sunshine, his decision to bring a fugitive into his home seemed increasingly questionable. Ben likes blueberries in his, he found himself saying instead of the interrogation he'd planned. Sophie nodded, already reaching for the carton of berries she'd found in his refrigerator. I noticed the empty containers in the recycling, figured they were a favorite. The observation, casual yet detailed, reinforced Jack's assessment that Sophie was trained to notice particulars to assess environments and people. Not military precision, but something adjacent, the awareness of someone whose survival had depended on reading rooms and individuals. Ben's footsteps on the stairs interrupted any response Jack might have made. His son appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, Ellen's inquisitive eyes immediately locking onto the stranger in their kitchen. Dad? He questioned, uncertainty evident in his voice. Jack moved to his son's side, a steadying hand on his shoulder. Ben, this is Ms. Sophie. She needed some help last night during the storm, so she stayed in our guest room. Ben studied Sophie with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. Are you hurt? He asked, noting the bandage visible beneath her rolled-up sleeve. Sophie's expression softened. Just a little. Your dad fixed me up. He's good at fixing things, Ben stated with absolute certainty, moving toward his usual seat at the kitchen table. That's his job. He says if something's broken, it just needs the right tools and enough patience. Something flickered across Sophie's face at Ben's words, a shadow of recognition or longing that vanished before Jack could properly identify it. She turned back to the stove, flipping pancakes with the same graceful efficiency with which she'd tended to her appearance. That sounds like very wise advice, she commented, sliding a plate of perfectly golden pancakes toward Ben. My father used to say something similar, though he was a doctor, not an electrician. Jack raised an eyebrow at this first personal detail Sophie had volunteered. He poured coffee for himself, and Sophie, noting how she took it, black another small data point in his ongoing assessment. Ben, oblivious to the undercurrents between the adults, happily devoured his breakfast. These are almost as good as my one, he declared between mouthfuls, which Jack recognized as high praise from his son. Almost, Sophie questioned with mock offense, a genuine smile brightening her features. Dad makes faces in them, Ben explained. Sometimes animals, sometimes spaceships. Jack felt a rush of embarrassment at this revelation of his private ritual with his son. These small moments of whimsy were rare departures from his otherwise practical nature, remnants of the man Ellen had drawn out from beneath his disciplined exterior. I'll have to up my game next time, Sophie replied lightly, though the presumption of a next time hung awkwardly in the air between them. After breakfast, Jack sent Ben upstairs to get dressed for school, leaving him alone with Sophie in the kitchen. The easy domesticity of the morning meal evaporated, replaced by the stark reality of their situation. I should go, Sophie said quietly, already moving to collect her still damp clothes from the dryer. I've imposed enough, and you've made your priorities clear. Jack's weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug, drawing warmth from the ceramic as he considered their limited options. Where will you go? Sophie's shoulders straightened, a corporate executive's posture reasserting itself. I have a plan. A contact who might help me access some offshore accounts Marcus doesn't know about. Enough to disappear properly. Running doesn't solve problems. Jack observed the lesson hard-earned through his own attempts to outpace grief after Ellen's death. It just changes the terrain you're fighting on. I'm not running, Sophie countered, a flash of steel beneath her composed exterior. I'm regrouping. There's a difference. The familiar rhythm of Ben's footsteps on the stairs signaled the end of their conversation. Jack rose to his feet, decision made with the same clarity that had guided critical missions. I'll drive Ben to school, he stated, gathering his keys from the hook by the door. You can use my computer if you need to. Passwords on the sticky note under the keyboard. Sophie's surprise was evident. You're trusting me with your computer. Your home, Jack's weathered face revealed nothing of his internal calculations. If you wanted to rob me, you'd have done it while we slept. If you're government, you'd have identified yourself by now. If you're running a con, you've chosen the poorest mark in Millbrook. A startled laugh escaped Sophie, perhaps the first genuine reaction he'd witnessed. Fair assessment. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Jack cautioned. When I get back, we're going to have a more detailed conversation about exactly what you're involved in, and then we'll decide next steps. The school drop-off routine proceeded with its usual efficiency, though Jack remained hyper-aware of their surroundings, scanning for unfamiliar vehicles or surveillance. Ben, perceptive as always, sensed his father's heightened alertness. Is Ms. Sophie in trouble, Dad? He asked as they waited in the drop-off line. Jack considered how to answer, balancing truth against age-appropriate explanations. She might be, he acknowledged. Sometimes good people find themselves in difficult situations. Ben nodded sagely, processing this information with the same methodical approach he applied to his science projects. Like when Mom got sick. That wasn't her fault either. Jack's chest tightened at the comparison. Something like that, buddy. Different kind of trouble, though. Are you going to help her? Ben persisted, gathering his backpack as they approached the school entrance. Jack ruffled his son's hair, a rare gesture of physical affection that felt necessary in this moment. I'm going to do what's right, he promised, just like Mom would have wanted. This answer seemed to satisfy Ben, who accepted Jack's standard farewell fist bump before racing toward his waiting friends. Jack watched until his son disappeared into the building, the familiar ache of Ellen's absence particularly acute this morning. The drive back to the house gave Jack time to formulate his approach. Sophie was clearly professional, educated, and in legitimate danger. But bringing trouble to his doorstep, to Ben's world, wasn't an option. There would need to be boundaries, contingencies, and absolute clarity. He was surprised to find Sophie sitting on his front porch when he returned, a laptop balanced on her knees, intense concentration evident in her posture. She looked up at his approach, closing the computer with the swift movement of someone accustomed to protecting sensitive information. Found what you needed, Jack asked, climbing the porch steps with the measured pace of a man who never rushed unless circumstances absolutely demanded it. Some of it, Sophie replied, frustration evident in her voice. Marcus has been thorough. My accounts are frozen, my reputation is destroyed, and there's a surprisingly detailed warrant for my arrest. Jack settled into the chair opposite her, the same seat where he'd spent countless evenings with Ellen, planning their future while watching the neighborhood settle into twilight. Tell me everything, he requested simply. From the beginning. Sophie's hesitation was palpable, the calculated risk assessment of someone accustomed to holding cards close. I need to know what I'm dealing with. Jack pressed, his tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable. All of it. Sophie drew a deep breath, decision made. My real name is Elizabeth Harrison. Was the CEO of Meridian Capital Partners. We manage billions in investments for institutional clients, pension funds, endowments. Jack nodded, the name vaguely familiar from financial segments he typically ignored on the evening news. 3 months ago, I noticed discrepancies in our emerging markets, fund returns that were too consistent, transaction costs that didn't align with market conditions. Elizabeth's voice took on the precise cadence of someone presenting complex information. When I investigated further, I found a sophisticated scheme routing client funds through shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Singapore. Your partner's operation, Jack supplied. Elizabeth nodded. Marcus Reed. We founded the firm together 12 years ago. He handles client relationships. I oversee investment strategy. At least that was the arrangement. Her fingers tightened around the laptop. What I didn't realize was that Marcus had been building a parallel structure within our company for years. Loyal employees maintain servers documentation designed to implicate if the fraud was ever discovered. Jack's expression remained neutral, though his mind cataloged the sophistication required for such an operation. And when you confronted him, I did not directly, Elizabeth admitted. I quietly gathered evidence planning to take it to the SEC. But Marcus has surveillance on all company communications. He discovered what I was doing and she gestured to her injured state. His security team tried to contain the situation while he went to the authorities with doctored evidence showing I masterminded the entire operation. How much money are we talking about? Jack asked the practical question of a man who needed to understand stakes. $438 million, Elizabeth replied without hesitation. Primarily from teachers' pension funds and university endowments. The amount more than Jack would earn in several thousand lifetimes momentarily stunned him into silence. This wasn't just white-collar crime, it was devastation on a massive scale, affecting thousands of ordinary people's retirements and livelihoods. In the flash drive, he asked, recalling the metallic object he'd glimpsed the previous night. Elizabeth's surprise at his observation quickly transformed into reluctant admiration. Evidence. Account numbers, transfer records, communications, everything needed to prove Marcus is behind the fraud. I was accessing our secure server through the basement terminal when his team found me. Jack processed this information with the same methodical approach he applied to complex electrical systems, tracing connections, identifying vulnerabilities, assessing power sources. Why Millbrook? He finally asked. Of all places to run, why here? Elizabeth's gaze dropped to her hands now clasped tightly in her lap. I didn't choose Millbrook specifically. I was trying to reach a private airfield about 20 miles north. Car broke down in the storm. I was seeking shelter when I saw the maintenance door to the basement. Jack nodded, the explanation plausible enough. Yet something in her demeanor suggested there was something personal she wasn't sharing. Before he could press further, Elizabeth's posture suddenly changed, tension radiating through her body as she focused on something beyond Jack's shoulder. He turned, following her gaze, to a black SUV moving slowly down Elm Street, unusual in a neighborhood where most residents drove practical sedans or pickup trucks. Inside, Jack ordered quietly, already moving to hold the door for her. Second-floor bathroom has no windows. Stay there until I come for you. Elizabeth complied without question, recognizing the authority in his voice. As she disappeared into the house, Jack remained on the porch, deliberately casual, as he retrieved his phone from his pocket. The SUV continued its measured pace down the street before turning at the corner and disappearing from view. Jack memorized the plate number automatically, though it was likely a rental or stolen. He gave it 5 minutes before returning inside, finding Elizabeth exactly where he'd instructed her, composure remarkably intact, despite the evident fear in her eyes. False alarm, maybe, he informed her, though his tone conveyed his doubt. But they're looking for you, and they've expanded their search to Millbrook. Elizabeth nodded, accepting this development with the resignation of someone who had anticipated it. I should leave. I've already put you and Ben at risk. And go where? Jack challenged. With what resources? In what vehicle? Sometimes the best place to hide is exactly where no one would expect to find you. A flicker of hope crossed Elizabeth's face. You're suggesting I stay? I'm suggesting we be smart about this, Jack clarified. No unnecessary risks, no heroics. We secure the evidence, establish your innocence, and do it all without endangering Ben. Elizabeth studied him with newfound intensity. Why would you help me? You don't know me. You have no stake in this fight. Jack moved to the kitchen window, scanning the street with the practiced vigilance of someone who had conducted surveillance in far more hostile environments. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. 20 years ago, I was part of an operation in Sarajevo. Intelligence failure led us into an ambush. My team was pinned down, no extraction possible. His weathered hands gripped the counter knuckles, whitening with the memory. A local woman school teacher with 3 kids hid us in her cellar for 4 days. Fed us tended wounds, kept us alive until exfil became possible. He turned to face Elizabeth, his expression grave. When I asked her why she'd risked everything for strangers, she said something I've never forgotten. There are moments when doing nothing is the same as doing wrong. Elizabeth absorbed this recognition dawning in her eyes. You're not just helping me because it's the right thing to do. You're repaying a debt. Call it what you want, Jack replied with a shrug that belied the significance of his decision. But if we're doing this, we do it my way. Methodical, cautious, by the book. Elizabeth's professional demeanor reasserted itself as she extended her hand. Agreed. Partners, Jack accepted the handshake, his calloused palm enveloping her smooth one, in a gesture that formalized their unlikely alliance. Partners, he confirmed. Now let's see what's on that flash drive of yours. As Jack set up his computer on the kitchen table, positioned to allow constant visual monitoring of the street, Elizabeth retrieved the drive from her borrowed clothing. The small metallic device seemed incongruously ordinary given the magnitude of information it supposedly contained. It's encrypted, Elizabeth warned as she inserted it into the USB port. Dual authentication required. Jack raised an eyebrow. Meaning, it needs both a password and a physical key to unlock, she explained, reaching for the thin gold chain around her neck. From beneath her borrowed shirt, she withdrew a small pendant, not jewelry, as Jack had assumed, but a sophisticated security key disguised as a decorative charm. Impressive, he acknowledged, watching, as she connected the device and entered a complex alphanumeric sequence from memory. The drive's contents appeared on screen, folders meticulously organized with the precision Jack had come to expect from Elizabeth. She navigated through them with practiced efficiency, opening documents that meant little to Jack, but clearly told a compelling story to her trained eye. Here, she said, finally pointing to a series of transaction records. These are the original wire transfers Marcus initiated, and here, she opened another document, is where he altered the authorization forms to include my digital signature. Jack studied the screen, trusting her expertise but requiring his own understanding. Can you prove they're forgeries? With the right forensic analysis, yes, Elizabeth confirmed. Digital signatures leave timestamps in the metadata. The problem is getting someone to perform that analysis when Marcus has already convinced the authorities I'm guilty. Jack considered this challenge, mentally reviewing contacts from his former life, individuals with specialized skills who operated in the gray areas between official channels. I might know someone, he admitted. Former intelligence works private security now. But he'll want verification. This is legitimate. Elizabeth hesitated, then nodded. Set it up, but carefully. As Jack reached for his phone, a notification chimed from Elizabeth's laptop, an email alert that caused her to freeze momentarily before clicking to open it. It's from my executive assistant, she explained, scanning the contents with increasing intensity. Encrypted channel we established for emergencies. Marcus is moving faster than I expected. Board meeting tomorrow to formally remove me as CEO. Once that happens, I lose access to internal systems that could prove my innocence. Jack processed this new deadline with the calm assessment of someone accustomed to mission parameters changing mid-operation. Then we accelerate our timeline. I'll contact my guy now. As he stepped onto the porch to make the call, Jack felt the familiar focus of operational planning settling over him, the clarity that came with having a defined objective and limited time frame. It had been years since he'd felt this particular type of alertness, this purposeful direction of his capabilities. His contact, David Chen, former NSA analyst turned private security consultant, answered on the third ring. Their conversation was brief, technical, and concluded with an agreement to meet that evening at a location Jack specified. When he returned to the kitchen, he found Elizabeth staring at the family photograph Ben had left on the table. Jack, Ellen, and infant Ben at the beach, all sandy feet and sunburned noses. "Your wife," Elizabeth asked softly, a gentleness in her voice that hadn't been present in their previous discussions. Jack nodded, unexpected emotion tightening his throat. "Ellen, cancer 2 years ago. Ben was 6. Elizabeth's gaze remained on the photograph, something unreadable crossing her features. "She was beautiful and clearly brilliant. I noticed the scientific journals and her name on the bookshelf." "Molecular biologist," Jack confirmed, a hint of pride breaking through his usual reserve. "Researching targeted cancer therapies, ironically enough. Never had the chance to benefit from her own work." Elizabeth returned the photograph to its place with careful reverence. "I'm sorry, truly." Jack accepted her condolence with a single nod, uncomfortable with the personal turn their conversation had taken. "Meeting set for 7 tonight," he redirected. "Gives us time to prepare what he'll need to see and establish a secure location." As they turned their attention to the technical preparations, Jack maintained his professional focus. Yet something had shifted in the atmosphere between them, a mutual recognition of loss that transcended their different worlds and circumstances. The remainder of the afternoon passed in methodical preparation. Elizabeth extracted key documents from the drive, organizing them into a presentation that would quickly establish the fraud's mechanics. Jack secured the house with subtle measures that wouldn't alarm Ben, but would alert him to any intrusion, old techniques from a life he'd thought long behind him. When it came time to pick up Ben from school, Jack faced the tactical dilemma he'd been anticipating. Leave Elizabeth alone at the house, or bring her with him, potentially exposing both her and Ben in public. "I'll come with you," Elizabeth decided before he could voice the options. "Staying alone makes me a more vulnerable target, and I can slouch in the back seat when we reach the school." Jack nodded, approving of her tactical assessment. "We keep it casual. You're an old friend visiting from out of town. No details beyond that for Ben's sake." The school pickup proceeded without incident, though Jack maintained heightened awareness throughout. Ben, delighted by the novelty of having a guest, chattered happily about his day as they drove home, seemingly oblivious to the tension radiating from the adults. "We're studying habitats in science," he informed Elizabeth, who had indeed slouched down during the actual pickup, but now sat properly in the passenger seat. "I have to build a diorama of a rainforest ecosystem by next week." "That sounds fascinating," Elizabeth replied with genuine interest. "I visited the Amazon rainforest once for a conservation investment project. The biodiversity is extraordinary." Ben's eyes widened with excitement. "You've been to the Amazon, for real?" "For real," Elizabeth confirmed, a warm smile transforming her features. "I could help with your project if your dad doesn't mind." Jack glanced at them in the rearview mirror, struck by the unexpected connection forming between his son and their guest. "Fine by me," he agreed, his tone lighter than it had been all day. Ben's got his mother's scientific curiosity. The mention of Ellen might have created awkwardness, but Elizabeth navigated it with surprising grace. "That's a wonderful legacy," she observed. "My father was a surgeon, and while I didn't follow him into medicine, he always said I inherited his attention to detail and steady hands." This casual reference to her past, the second such detail she'd shared, caught Jack's attention. Elizabeth Harrison wasn't just revealing information. She was gradually allowing herself to become a person to them, not merely a fugitive with a problem to solve. After dinner, a simple meal Jack prepared, while Elizabeth helped Ben with homework, they established the evening's plan. Mrs. Abernathy from next door would watch Ben, while Jack and Elizabeth met with David. Ben accepted this arrangement with minimal protest, especially when Elizabeth promised to continue their rainforest discussion tomorrow. As they prepared to leave, Jack knelt to Ben's level, a habit from the boy's younger years that now required more of a crouch. "Remember the rules when I'm out," Ben nodded solemnly. "Lock the doors. Don't answer for anyone but you or Mrs. Abernathy. Emergency numbers by the phone." "That's my sailor," Jack affirmed, their standard farewell fist bump carrying more significance tonight. Back before bedtime, the meeting location Jack had selected was an old boathouse on the river's edge, owned by a former Navy comrade who used it seasonally. Isolated, defensible, with multiple exit routes, optimal for sensitive discussions. As they drove, Elizabeth broke the silence that had settled between them. "There's something I haven't told you," she admitted, her voice steady, despite the evident difficulty of the confession. "About why I was in Millbrook." Jack maintained his focus on the road, giving her space to continue. "I recognized your name," she said finally. "Jack Thompson. 6 years ago, there was a building collapse in Manhattan, the old Harrington structure being renovated for luxury apartments. You were working electrical systems." Jack's grip tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel. That job, one of his first major contracts after moving to Connecticut, had ended in tragedy and heroism both. "The support failure," he acknowledged. 14 casualties. Elizabeth nodded, her gaze fixed on the darkening landscape beyond the windshield. "There would have been 15, but you went back in after the initial collapse. Saved a young woman trapped in the elevator shaft." Jack remained silent, memories of dust and darkness and desperate calculations flooding back after years of careful compartmentalization. "That woman was my sister Caroline," Elizabeth continued, emotion finally breaking through her composed exterior. "She was 24, just starting her career. The doctors said she would have died from crush injuries if you'd been even 10 minutes later." Jack absorbed this revelation with the steadiness that had defined his professional life, though its significance landed with seismic force. Not coincidence, then. Connection. "You weren't randomly passing through Millbrook," he stated, rather than asked, pieces falling into place. "You came looking for me." Elizabeth nodded confirmation of what he'd already deduced. "When everything fell apart with Marcus, I needed someone I could trust completely. Someone with skills beyond my world. I remembered the man who saved Caroline, how the investigators described your composure, your resourcefulness under catastrophic conditions." Her voice softened. "I didn't expect you to take me in. I just hoped you might point me toward resources, perhaps make a call to someone who could help." The road ahead disappeared into darkness, headlights illuminating only the immediate path forward, an apt metaphor for their current situation. Jack processed this new information with the methodical thoroughness that had kept him alive through 3 war zones. "Your sister," he said finally, "she recovered." Elizabeth's face lightened slightly. "Completely. She's a pediatric nurse now in Seattle, married with a 2-year-old daughter." She hesitated before adding, "She named her daughter Ellen." When the coincidence, or perhaps it wasn't coincidence at all, sent an unexpected wave of emotion through Jack's carefully maintained composure. Ellen. His Ellen, gone 2 years, whose scientific brilliance might have saved countless lives had she lived to complete her research. Another Ellen beginning her life because Jack had managed to save one woman from the rubble. The circle of consequence of meaning stretched across years and lives in ways he'd never fully comprehended until this moment. "Thank you for telling me," he said simply, the inadequacy of the words evident to them both. They arrived at the boathouse in silence, each processing the revelation that had transformed their partnership from coincidence to something approaching destiny. The knowledge that their lives had already intersected once years before this storm-drenched night added weight and complexity to the alliance they'd formed. David Chen was already waiting when they arrived, his nondescript sedan parked discreetly behind the structure. His greeting to Jack, the abbreviated handshake of old comrades, transitioned quickly to analytical assessment of Elizabeth. "Jack says you have a data authentication problem," he stated without preamble, his tone professional rather than judgmental. Elizabeth met his gaze directly. "Digital signature forgery and document manipulation. I need verification that will stand up to SEC and FBI scrutiny." David nodded, already moving toward the boathouse entrance. "Show me what you've got." As they set up Elizabeth's presentation on a secure laptop, Jack maintained perimeter security, the familiar rhythm of operational procedures settling into his bones. The tactics might differ from his military days, but the fundamental principles remained unchanged: identify threats, protect assets, maintain situational awareness. The night stretched ahead, filled with technical discussions and strategic planning. Yet beneath the operational considerations, Jack found himself contemplating the unseen connections that bound lives together across time and circumstance. The woman whose sister he'd saved now under his protection. The son who bore his mother's scientific curiosity, forming an unexpected bond with a fugitive financial executive. The photograph of Ellen watching over them all from the coffee table at home seemed suddenly less an artifact of loss and more a beacon guiding them forward through darkness neither had anticipated. As David examined the evidence Elizabeth had compiled, Jack's military-trained mind began formulating contingencies, escape routes, defensive positions. If Elizabeth's partner had found her in Millbrook, once he would find her again. The question wasn't if, but when and what resources he would bring to bear when he did. The tactical landscape was clear. The emotional terrain increasingly complex. Twist one had arrived. The woman he'd rescued wasn't a random stranger, but connected to his past act of heroism. Now he would need to decide if this connection was reason to trust more deeply or question more thoroughly as the shadows lengthened around them and the stakes escalated with each passing hour. The remainder of the afternoon passed in methodical preparation. Elizabeth extracted key documents from the drive, organizing them into a presentation that would quickly establish the fraud's mechanics. Jack secured the house with subtle measures that wouldn't alarm Ben, but would alert him to any intrusion old techniques from a life he'd thought long behind him. When it came time to pick up Ben from school, Jack faced the tactical dilemma he'd been anticipating: leave Elizabeth alone at the house or bring her with him, potentially exposing both her and Ben in public. "I'll come with you," Elizabeth decided before he could voice the options. "Staying alone makes me a more vulnerable target, and I can slouch in the back seat when we reach the school." Jack nodded, approving of her tactical assessment. "We keep it casual. You're an old friend visiting from out of town. No details beyond that for Ben's sake." The school pickup proceeded without incident, though Jack maintained heightened awareness throughout. Ben, delighted by the novelty of having a guest, chattered happily about his day as they drove home, seemingly oblivious to the tension radiating from the adults. "We're studying habitats in science," he informed Elizabeth, who had indeed slouched down during the actual pickup, but now sat properly in the passenger seat. "I have to build a diorama of a rainforest ecosystem by next week." "That sounds fascinating," Elizabeth replied with genuine interest. "I visited the Amazon rainforest once for a conservation investment project. The biodiversity is extraordinary." Ben's eyes widened with excitement. "You've been to the Amazon for real?" "For real," Elizabeth confirmed, a warm smile transforming her features. "I could help with your project if your dad doesn't mind." Jack glanced at them in the rearview mirror, struck by the unexpected connection forming between his son and their guest. "Fine by me," he agreed, his tone lighter than it had been all day. Ben's got his mother's scientific curiosity. The mention of Ellen might have created awkwardness, but Elizabeth navigated it with surprising grace. "That's a wonderful legacy," she observed. "My father was a surgeon, and while I didn't follow him into medicine, he always said I inherited his attention to detail and steady hands." This casual reference to her past, the second such detail she'd shared, caught Jack's attention. Elizabeth Harrison wasn't just revealing information. She was gradually allowing herself to become a person to them, not merely a fugitive with a problem to solve. After dinner, a simple meal Jack prepared while Elizabeth helped Ben with homework, they established the evening's plan. Mrs. Abernathy from next door would watch Ben while Jack and Elizabeth met with David. Ben accepted this arrangement with minimal protest, especially when Elizabeth promised to continue their rainforest discussion tomorrow. As they prepared to leave, Jack knelt to Ben's level, a habit from the boy's younger years that now required more of a crouch. "Remember the rules when I'm out?" Ben nodded solemnly. "Lock the doors. Don't answer for anyone but you or Mrs. Abernathy. Emergency numbers by the phone." "That's my sailor," Jack affirmed, their standard farewell fist bump carrying more significance tonight. Back before bedtime. On the meeting location Jack had selected was an old boathouse on the river's edge, owned by a former Navy comrade who used it seasonally. Isolated, defensible, with multiple exit routes, optimal for sensitive discussions. As they drove, Elizabeth broke the silence that had settled between them. "There's something I haven't told you," she admitted, her voice steady despite the evident difficulty of the confession. "About why I was in Millbrook." Jack maintained his focus on the road, giving her space to continue. I recognized your name, she said finally. Jack Thompson. 6 years ago, there was a building collapse in Manhattan, the old Harrington structure being renovated for luxury apartments. You were working electrical systems. Jack's grip tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel. That job, one of his first major contracts after moving to Connecticut, had ended in tragedy and heroism both. The support failure, he acknowledged. 14 casualties. Elizabeth nodded, her gaze fixed on the darkening landscape beyond the windshield. There would have been 15, but you went back in after the initial collapse, saved a young woman trapped in the elevator shaft. Jack remained silent, memories of dust and darkness and desperate calculations flooding back after years of careful compartmentalization. That woman was my sister Caroline, Elizabeth continued, emotion finally breaking through her composed exterior. She was 24, just starting her career. The doctor said she would have died from crush injuries if you'd been even 10 minutes later. Jack absorbed this revelation with the steadiness that had defined his professional life, though its significance landed with seismic force. Not coincidence, then. Connection. You weren't randomly passing through Millbrook, he stated, rather than asked, pieces falling into place. You came looking for me. Elizabeth nodded confirmation of what he had already deduced. When everything fell apart with Marcus, I needed someone I could trust completely. Someone with skills beyond my world. I remembered the man who saved Caroline, how the investigators described your composure, your resourcefulness under catastrophic conditions. Her voice softened. I didn't expect you to take me in. I just hoped you might point me toward resources, perhaps make a call to someone who could help. The road ahead disappeared into darkness, headlights illuminating only the immediate path forward, an apt metaphor for their current situation. Jack processed this new information with the methodical thoroughness that had kept him alive through 3 war zones. Your sister, he said finally. She recovered. Elizabeth's face lightened slightly. Completely. She's a pediatric nurse now in Seattle, married with a 2-year-old daughter. She hesitated before adding, she named her daughter Ellen. The coincidence, or perhaps it wasn't coincidence at all, sent an unexpected wave of emotion through Jack's carefully maintained composure. Ellen, his Ellen gone 2 years, whose scientific brilliance might have saved countless lives had she lived to complete her research. Another Ellen beginning her life because Jack had managed to save one woman from the rubble. The circle of consequence of meaning stretched across years and lives in ways he'd never fully comprehended until this moment. Thank you for telling me, he said simply, the inadequacy of the words evident to them both. They arrived at the boathouse in silence, each processing the revelation that had transformed their partnership from coincidence to something approaching destiny. The knowledge that their lives had already intersected once, years before this storm-drenched night, added weight and complexity to the alliance they'd formed. David Chen was already waiting when they arrived, his nondescript sedan parked discreetly behind the structure. His greeting to Jack, the abbreviated handshake of old comrades, transitioned quickly to analytical assessment of Elizabeth. Jack says you have a data authentication problem, he stated without preamble, his tone professional rather than judgmental. Elizabeth met his gaze directly. Digital signature forgery and document manipulation. I need verification that will stand up to SEC and FBI scrutiny. David nodded, already moving toward the boathouse entrance. Show me what you've got. The interior of the boathouse belied its weathered exterior. Jack had selected it precisely for this deception, rough-hewn timber walls concealing a surprisingly sophisticated space. A generator hummed quietly in the corner, powering the sparse but adequate lighting and the collection of equipment David began unpacking from a steel briefcase. Elizabeth set up her laptop on the battered wooden table that dominated the main room, her movements precise despite the evident tension in her shoulders. As David connected various devices to her computer, Jack positioned himself near the entrance, maintaining perimeter security with the practiced vigilance of someone who had conducted similar operations in far more hostile environments. The night air carried the sharp scent of approaching autumn, fallen leaves, cool water, and the distant smoke of wood stoves already lit against the evening chill. Jack's breath formed small clouds in the growing cold, but he remained motionless, attuned to every sound beyond the boathouse walls. The tactical part of his mind never truly rested, categorizing each rustle and snap as either natural or potential threat. Inside, Elizabeth and David spoke in the clipped technical language of specialists, terms like authentication protocols and digital forensics, floating through the open doorway to where Jack maintained his watch. The familiar rhythm of operational procedure settled into his bones, one man securing the perimeter, while specialists pursued the mission objective within. Jack, David's voice cut through his surveillance focus. You should see this. Jack moved back inside, carefully securing the door behind him. Elizabeth stood motionless beside the table, her face drained of color, eyes fixed on the screen before her. What am I looking at? Jack asked, noting the complex spreadsheet displayed on the laptop. David pointed to a highlighted sequence of transactions. These aren't just random fraud targets. They're specifically selected pension funds, all with something in common. He glanced at Elizabeth. You didn't know, she shook her head slowly, shock evident in her rigid posture. I knew the fraud existed, but not this pattern. Pattern, Jack pressed, moving closer to examine the screen. David's expression turned grim. Military pensions, police retirement funds, first responder benefit programs. These aren't just any institutional clients, they're specifically funds serving people who put their lives on the line. Jack's weathered face hardened as the implications registered. Not just financial crime, but targeted exploitation of the very people who protected others, a particularly despicable form of betrayal. There's more, David continued, navigating through additional files. The shell companies routing these funds, they're connected to a larger network. Meridian Capital isn't the only firm involved. Elizabeth's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Her hands began to tremble, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. How did I miss this? She whispered, voice barely audible. Jack recognized the expression on her face, the same stunned disbelief he'd seen in combat when soldiers discovered they'd been deliberately led into an ambush by trusted commanders. The psychological wound of betrayal ran deeper than any physical injury. Because you weren't meant to see it. David explained, his tone softening slightly. The pattern only becomes visible when you analyze across multiple fund families. From within Meridian alone, it looks like ordinary diversified fraud. Jack processed this information with the methodical thoroughness that had defined his military career. So Marcus isn't just stealing money, he's part of something bigger. Much bigger, David confirmed, gesturing to a network diagram now displayed on screen. This operation has hallmarks of organized crime, possibly with political connections. The technical sophistication alone suggests substantial resources. Elizabeth sank slowly into a chair, the implications visibly overwhelming her. All this time I thought I knew what we were fighting, she murmured. But it's like I've been seeing only one tentacle of the octopus. Jack moved to the small stove in the corner, methodically preparing the coffee with the same focused precision he applied to all tasks. The familiar routine provided space to think, to process, to formulate next steps, while Elizabeth and David continued their technical analysis. The scope had changed dramatically. What had appeared to be one corrupt executive scheme now revealed itself as something far more extensive and potentially more dangerous. Jack poured 3 cups of coffee, the ceramic mugs chipped and stained from years of use by fishermen and hunters. Here, he said, placing one before Elizabeth. The simple gesture, practical, unadorned, seemed to anchor her, pulling her back from the edge of overwhelming revelation. Thank you, she responded automatically, her fingers curling around the mug's warmth. The simple physical sensation appeared to steady her, and Jack noted the gradual return of color to her face. David, Jack began, his voice carrying the measured authority that had once commanded elite teams. What's the minimum time you need to authenticate the evidence we have? David considered this, mentally calculating resources and procedures. For court-level verification, 3 days minimum. For enough to convince the SEC to freeze further action. Maybe 24 hours if I pull in some favors. We don't have 24 hours, Elizabeth interjected, her professional focus reasserting itself. The board meeting is at 9 tomorrow morning. Once they formally remove me, Marcus consolidates control and can further cover his tracks. David glanced at Jack, a silent communication between men accustomed to operating under pressure. Then we need something to delay that meeting. A temporary disruption that buys us the time needed for the full analysis. What did you have in mind? Jack asked, already anticipating the direction of David's thinking. A preliminary report. David proposed turning to Elizabeth. Not the complete forensic analysis, but enough evidence to raise serious questions about Reed's claims. Delivered anonymously to all board members before the meeting. Not enough to exonerate you fully, but sufficient to create doubt and potentially postpone their decision. Elizabeth considered this strategy, her mind visibly working through implications and risks. It could work, she acknowledged. The board is conservative by nature. If there's even a suggestion that Marcus might be manipulating them, they'll want to investigate before taking irreversible action. I can have something by morning, David promised, already gathering the materials he would need. But you'll both need to maintain absolute radio silence. No electronic communications, no credit card transactions, nothing that creates a digital footprint. Jack nodded his understanding. He'd operated under similar constraints in far more hostile environments. We'll manage. When do we meet again? I'll contact you through the established channel, David replied, referring to the secure messaging system they'd used during Jack's service years. Likely tomorrow evening with preliminary results. As David packed his equipment with practiced efficiency, Jack pulled him aside for a private word. This is bigger than we thought, he said quietly, pitching his voice below Elizabeth's hearing. How exposed are we? David's expression remained neutral, but his eyes conveyed the gravity of his assessment. If what I'm seeing is accurate, these people have resources beyond typical corporate security, government connections, possibly intelligence assets. Jack absorbed this with the stoic acceptance of a man who had faced similar odds before. Recommendations. Secure location, minimal movement, alternative transportation. David paused, weighing his next words carefully, and Jack considered extraction options for the boy. Just in case. The suggestion sent an icy wave through Jack's veins, but he nodded once, acknowledging the tactical wisdom. Ben's safety transcended all other considerations, a non-negotiable priority that would dictate every decision moving forward. As David departed, taking copies of the key evidence with him, Jack and Elizabeth remained in the boathouse, processing this first significant step in their improvised mission. Your friend seems competent, Elizabeth observed, shutting down her laptop and returning it to its case. I'm impressed you've maintained these connections after leaving service. Jack began methodically removing traces of their presence, a habit ingrained through decades of operational security. In my experience, it's relationships that matter most in a crisis. Technology fails. Systems get compromised. But people you've bled with, they're the resource that never depreciates. Elizabeth absorbed this wisdom with thoughtful consideration. I wish I'd understood that better before now, she admitted quietly. I built my career on systems and structures, numbers and analysis. People were variables to be managed, not connections to be maintained. There was genuine regret in her voice, perhaps the most authentic emotion Jack had heard from her since their paths had crossed. He recognized it as the kind of realization that often came too late after significant loss. Never too late to recalibrate, he offered, simply holding the door as they exited into the cool autumn evening. The drive home proceeded in companionable silence, both processing the evening's developments and conserving energy for challenges ahead. As they turned onto Elm Street, however, Jack's practiced eye caught movement near his house, a figure briefly illuminated by the porch light before disappearing around the side of the building. His body-tensed hand automatically reaching toward the glove compartment where his service weapon was secured. Stay in the car, he instructed Elizabeth, his voice dropping to the controlled quiet of imminent engagement. Lock the doors. If I'm not back in 3 minutes, drive to the police station. Ask for Chief Brennan specifically. Before Elizabeth could protest, Jack was out of the vehicle, moving with the silent efficiency that had once made him a formidable operative. He approached his home from the neighbor's yard using shadows and vegetation for cover, all senses hyper-alert for threats to Ben. The side gate yielded to his touch, unlocked when he distinctly remembered securing it earlier. Jack drew his weapon, maintaining noise discipline as he advanced toward the backyard. A soft scraping sound from the kitchen window confirmed his suspicions, intruder attempting entry. Jack rounded the corner in a controlled rush weapon, raised voice pitched for maximum authority. Federal agent hands where I can see them. The figure at the window froze, then slowly raised their hands. Jack advanced cautiously, maintaining tactical distance while positioning himself to control the situation. As he drew closer, the porch light revealed his intruder, a woman in her late 20s dressed in dark clothing, fear evident in her wide eyes. "On your knees," Jack ordered, maintaining his position of authority. "Hands behind your head." The woman complied, movements suggesting professional training rather than criminal experience. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," she stated, voice remarkably steady despite the circumstances. Jack maintained his stance, weapon still trained on the intruder. Identification, slowly. With deliberate movements, the woman reached toward her jacket pocket, extracting a leather wallet, which she placed on the ground before her. "Rebecca Chen, I work with David." Jack's suspicion intensified rather than diminished. "David just left our meeting. Why would he send someone to my house?" "He didn't," Rebecca replied, maintaining her submissive posture. "Marcus Reed did. I'm undercover in his security team. David's my handler." This unexpected revelation demanded immediate verification. "Prove it," Jack demanded, unwavering in his tactical position. "Authorization code Delta 7 Whiskey Tango," Rebecca recited. "David's daughter is named Lily. His wife makes terrible lasagna but excellent martinis." Personal details that wouldn't appear in any database, the kind of verification Jack and David had established years ago for precisely this type of situation. Still, caution prevailed. "Why are you here?" Jack pressed, weapons still raised. Reed's team identified Elizabeth's location through cell tower triangulation. They tracked the emergency communication from her assistant. Rebecca's words came rapidly, now urgent. "Two tactical teams are en route to Millbrook. ETA 20 minutes. I came ahead to warn you." Jack processed this information with the rapid assessment of combat experience. How many personnel? 8 operators split between 2 vehicles. Former private military, armed, authorized to use necessary force to recover what they're calling stolen company property. The immediate threat to Ben superseded all other considerations. Jack lowered his weapon slightly. Decision made. Inside. Now. As they entered through the kitchen door, Elizabeth emerged from the shadows of the living room, Jack's backup weapon held with surprising competence. "She's clear," Elizabeth asked, maintaining her aim until Jack nodded confirmation. "Rebecca Chen," Jack introduced briefly, "works with David. Reed's people found us. We have 20 minutes. To her credit, Elizabeth absorbed this crisis with remarkable composure. "Ben," she asked immediately, prioritizing the child's safety. Still at Mrs. Abernathy's, Jack confirmed, already moving through the house with practiced efficiency, gathering essential items. "We need to move. All of us." Rebecca provided additional details as they prepared. "Reed's people believe Elizabeth is alone. They're expecting a single-cornered executive, not a former special operator with tactical training." "Advantage us," Jack acknowledged, retrieving a go-bag from a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, emergency supplies, cash credentials he'd hoped never to need again. "We split up. Makes us harder to track." "I have a safe house," Rebecca offered. "Off-grid cabin about 50 miles north. David uses it for witness protection cases." Jack nodded approval of this option. "I'll get Ben, then meet you there. Elizabeth goes with you. She's their primary target." Elizabeth, who had been gathering her limited possessions, paused at this division of forces. "We should stay together," she argued. "Splitting up leaves both groups more vulnerable. It divides their resources." Jack countered, checking his weapon with practiced movements. "They'll prioritize you over Ben and me, which gives us maneuverability. Standard evasion protocol." The reference to tactical doctrine seemed to reassure Elizabeth, who nodded reluctantly. "You're the expert." "Coordinates," Jack asked Rebecca, who quickly wrote down the cabin's location on a slip of paper. "No phones once we separate," Rebecca instructed. "They'll be monitoring all cellular networks." Jack committed the coordinates to memory before destroying the paper old habits from an operational life. "Vehicle clean sedan parked 2 blocks south," Rebecca replied. "Untraceable." The efficiency of their planning reflected professionals accustomed to crisis management, though from different spheres, military intelligence and corporate. Jack performed a final security sweep of the house, removing traces of Elizabeth's presence and ensuring nothing sensitive remained accessible. As they prepared to separate, Elizabeth approached Jack with unexpected hesitation. "Jack," she began, her composed facade momentarily slipping to reveal genuine concern. "Be careful. This is my fight, not yours or Ben's. Jack's weathered features remained impassive, though something shifted in his eyes, a recognition of the bond forming between them, despite their brief acquaintance. Haven't you figured it out yet? He asked quietly. It became my fight the moment you stepped into my house. The simple declaration carried weight beyond its words, a commitment from a man who had survived by honoring precisely such promises. Elizabeth held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once, accepting both the assurance and the responsibility it conveyed. See you at the cabin, she confirmed, her professional demeanor reasserting itself. As Rebecca and Elizabeth slipped out the back door toward their escape route, Jack gathered the final essentials for himself and Ben. The familiar focus of operational planning, identifying threats, securing assets, executing extraction, felt like returning to a language his body had never forgotten, despite years of civilian life. He left through the front door, maintaining the appearance of normalcy, as he walked to Mrs. Abernathy's house. The elderly neighbor greeted him with her usual cheerfulness, completely unaware of the danger approaching their quiet street. Ben was an absolute delight, she assured Jack as she invited him inside. Honestly, he's just finished his hot chocolate. Ben looked up from the kitchen table, face lighting, with the unguarded joy that always pierced Jack's heart. Dad, Mrs. Abernathy showed me how to make paper cranes. I made one for you and one for Miss Sophie. Jack maintained his calm exterior while internally calculating escape routes and timing. That's great, buddy. Listen, how would you like to go on a little adventure tonight? Ben's eyes widened with excitement. Like camping, really. Something like that, Jack confirmed, helping his son gather his backpack. We need to leave right away, though. It's a surprise. Mrs. Abernathy, perceptive despite her age, caught the tension in Jack's manner. Everything all right, Jack? She inquired quietly, as Ben collected his paper cranes from the table. Family emergency. Jack explained the partial truth, easier to maintain than a complete fabrication. My sister needs some help. We might be gone a few days. The explanation satisfied the neighbor, who hurried to pack some cookies for Ben's journey. Jack used these precious minutes to scan the street through the front window, still clear of unfamiliar vehicles, but time was running critically short. Ready for adventure? Jack asked as they stepped onto the porch, his hand resting protectively on Ben's shoulder. Ready, Ben confirmed enthusiastically, completely unaware of the danger necessitating their midnight departure. They walked casually to Jack's truck, maintaining the appearance of a routine outing. As he secured Ben in the back seat, Jack's trained eye caught movement at the far end of the street, headlights approaching slowly, deliberately. Change of plans, he murmured, quickly redirecting to the neighbor's car parked in Mrs. Abernathy's driveway. The elderly woman had given him emergency keys years ago after Ellen's diagnosis had sometimes required urgent hospital visits. We're borrowing Mrs. Abernathy's car, Ben asked, confusion evident in his voice, as Jack transferred him to the sedan's back seat. Just for tonight, Jack explained, starting the engine with practiced calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Our truck has a funny noise. Don't want it breaking down on our adventure. As they pulled out of the driveway, Jack maintained normal speed and driving patterns, even as he noted the black SUV now turning onto Elm Street. In the rearview mirror, he watched it slow as it approached his darkened house. Where's Ms. Sophie? Ben inquired, peering out the window as they left their neighborhood behind. Isn't she coming with us? Jack navigated a series of turns designed to identify potential surveillance while formulating an age-appropriate explanation. She had to take care of some business, he replied, eyes constantly checking mirrors for signs of pursuit. We'll see her tomorrow. Ben accepted this with the resilience of childhood attention, already shifting to the excitement of their unexpected nighttime journey. Is this like when you were in the Navy, a secret mission? The innocent question landed with surprising weight. In many ways, this was exactly like Jack's former life: calculated risks, protective operations, evasive maneuvers. Responsibilities he'd thought long behind him had resurfaced with remarkable familiarity. Something like that, Jack acknowledged, executing another turn to confirm they weren't being followed. But this mission is special. Know why? Ben shook his head, leaning forward in his seatbelt with anticipation. Because you're my partner on this one, Jack explained, meeting his son's eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. And that makes it the most important mission I've ever had. On the simple truth that Ben's safety outweighed all other considerations remained unspoken, but formed the foundation of every decision Jack had made since receiving Rebecca's warning. As they left Millbrook behind, merging onto the highway heading north, Jack allowed himself a moment of tactical assessment. Elizabeth and Rebecca had approximately 15 minutes head start. Reed's team would prioritize the search for Elizabeth once they discovered his house empty. Local resources in a small town like Millbrook were limited, making immediate reinforcements unlikely. All factors suggested successful extraction was probable. Yet, as the miles accumulated beneath their borrowed wheels, Jack couldn't shake the sense that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully constructed post-military life. The familiar weight of operational responsibility had returned, but now it carried additional complexity, not just protecting his son, but honoring the unexpected alliance with a woman whose world couldn't have been more different from his own. The cabin coordinates Rebecca had provided led them deep into the wooded hills north of Millbrook isolated territory, where Jack had occasionally taken Ben fishing, though never to this particular location. The tactical advantages were obvious: limited access roads, natural surveillance barriers, multiple evacuation routes if necessary. As midnight approached, Jack turned onto a gravel fire road that wound through increasingly dense forest. The borrowed sedan handled the rough terrain adequately, though not with the capability of his own truck. After several miles, he identified the unmarked turnoff Rebecca had described, little more than a gap between trees that might be mistaken for a game trail by casual observers. The cabin materialized from the darkness, a substantial structure, despite its isolated location with solar panels visible on the southern-facing roof. A single light burned in what appeared to be the kitchen window, and Rebecca's sedan was parked beneath a camouflaged carport structure. Jack parked alongside it, scanning the perimeter before gently waking Ben, who had dozed off during the final stretch of their journey. "We're here, sailor," he murmured, helping his drowsy son from the back seat. "Just a little further." They approached the cabin cautiously, Jack's free hand resting near his concealed weapon, despite the apparent security of their location. Old habits, necessary ones. The door opened before they reached it, revealing Elizabeth's silhouette against the warm light from within. "You made it," she said, relief evident in her voice. "No complications." "Clean extraction," Jack confirmed, guiding Ben up the steps. "Borrowed transportation, no pursuit detected." Inside, the cabin revealed itself as a well-equipped safe house rather than a rustic retreat. Communications equipment occupied one corner, while maps and surveillance monitors suggested regular operational use. Rebecca sat at a computer terminal, focused intently on multiple screens, displaying what appeared to be traffic camera feeds and police band communications. "Reed's team searched your house," she reported without looking up from her monitoring. "They're expanding to a grid search of Millbrook, but the borrowed car was a good call. They're looking for your truck in my sedan." Jack nodded approval of her update, settling Ben on a comfortable sofa where the boy immediately drifted back to sleep. Elizabeth appeared at his side with a blanket, which she draped gently over the child with unexpected tenderness. "He's remarkable," she observed quietly. "So resilient." Jack watched his son's peaceful breathing, the familiar ache of protectiveness intensifying under current circumstances. "He's had to be." Elizabeth's gaze lingered on Ben before shifting to Jack, a new understanding in her expression. "Like his father." The simple observation, acknowledging both Jack's strength and the cost it extracted, created a moment of connection between them that transcended their tactical alliance. For a brief instant, the professional facades both maintained slipped, revealing the human vulnerabilities beneath. Rebecca's voice broke the moment. "David's preliminary analysis is coming through," she announced, gesturing them toward the communication equipment. "Secure transmission encrypted channel." As Jack and Elizabeth gathered around the terminal, Rebecca discreetly moved to the kitchen area, giving them privacy for what might be sensitive information. The message appeared line by line on the secure screen, David's methodical assessment of the evidence they provided. Jack read over Elizabeth's shoulder, noting the technical language interspersed with highlighted sections of particular significance. As the report progressed, Elizabeth's posture gradually stiffened, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "This can't be right," she whispered, fingers gripping the edge of the desk until her knuckles whitened. "There must be some mistake." Jack studied the document, focusing on the highlighted passages. "Explain it to me," he requested, his practical mind needing concrete details. Elizabeth swallowed hard, struggling to maintain her composure. According to this analysis, the fraud pattern extends beyond Marcus. There are similar transaction structures at three other major investment firms. Her voice faltered momentarily, including Sentinel Group. Sentinel Group, Jack repeated the name vaguely familiar from financial news segments he typically ignored. Why is that significant? Elizabeth turned to face him, her professional mask slipping to reveal raw shock. Because Sentinel is run by William Harrison. She paused, the words clearly difficult to form. My father. The revelation landed with seismic force. Jack processed this new information with the disciplined focus of a trained operative, examining implications and consequences rather than emotional reactions. You're certain? He asked, simply needing verification before proceeding. Elizabeth nodded, her eyes reflecting a complex mixture of disbelief and devastating certainty. The transaction patterns are identical. The shell company structures mirror those at Meridian exactly. Her breathing had become irregular, shoulders rising and falling with each shallow intake of air. It can't be coincidence. Jack placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, the simple human contact grounding them both in the reality of their situation. What does this mean tactically? The practical question seemed to help Elizabeth regain her professional focus. It means this isn't just about Marcus framing me. It's about a coordinated operation across multiple firms. She drew a deep breath, visibly pulling herself together. And it means my father is either a complicit or being manipulated, just as I was. Rebecca rejoined them, her expression grave. There's more, she said quietly. David included intelligence on current movements. Reed's security team has expanded beyond Millbrook. They've deployed additional personnel to New York, Boston, and Chicago. Looking for potential hideouts, Jack surmised tactical assessment already adapting to this new information. Rebecca nodded confirmation. And they've brought in specialized equipment. Signal interceptors, thermal imaging, drone surveillance. She glanced at Elizabeth. This is beyond standard corporate security response. They're operating like a private intelligence agency. Because that's exactly what they are, Elizabeth replied, her professional analysis reasserting itself despite the personal shock she'd just endured. These pension funds represent billions in liquid assets. The people behind this would consider that worth significant operational investment. Jack moved to the window, scanning the darkness beyond the cabin, with the practiced vigilance of someone who had conducted operations in far more hostile environments. The tactical landscape had shifted dramatically in the past hour. What had appeared to be one corrupt executive's vendetta now revealed itself as something far more extensive, with correspondingly greater resources to deploy against them. We need to adjust our timeline, he stated, turning back to the women. David's preliminary report may buy us a delay with the board, but these people won't wait for legal processes. They'll escalate until they recover that evidence or eliminate the threat. The stark assessment hung in the air between them. Elizabeth's face paled further, but she nodded her understanding. What do you suggest? We accelerate, Jack replied, years of operational planning evident in his concise response. Rather than waiting for David's complete analysis, we take what we have directly to someone with sufficient authority to act immediately. Someone beyond their influence network. FBI Organized Crime Division, Rebecca suggested. My contact there is solid career agent, impeccable record. Elizabeth shook her head. Too many potential connections to navigate. We need someone with both the authority and the motivation to act quickly. She hesitated, then continued with evident reluctance. Someone like Treasury Secretary Howard. Jack raised an eyebrow at this suggestion. Cabinet-level government official. That's ambitious. It's also logical, Elizabeth countered. Before joining the administration, Howard led the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. He built his reputation on pension fund protections. This case would resonate personally, and he has the authority to initiate immediate freeze actions across multiple agencies. Jack considered this strategy, weighing tactical risks against potential rewards. How do we reach someone at that level? I know his chief of staff, Elizabeth admitted. We served on a regulatory commission together 5 years ago. If I can get a secure message to her, she'll arrange a meeting. The plan had merit, bypassing conventional channels in favor of a direct approach to someone with sufficient authority to take immediate action. Yet Jack's tactical assessment identified critical vulnerabilities. Communication is our weakness, he noted. Any electronic contact risks interception. These people have resources to monitor all standard channels. Rebecca nodded agreement. And physical movement increases exposure. They'll have transportation hubs under surveillance airports, train stations, major highways. Jack absorbed these constraints, his mind already formulating alternatives. Years of special operations had taught him that conventional limitations often necessitated unconventional solutions. We don't use electronic communications, and we don't use obvious transportation routes. He stated the outline of a plan taking shape. We go low-tech, runners, paper messages, secondary roads. The methods these people won't expect from a Wall Street executive. Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly at this approach. Primitive counter-surveillance against modern technology. Sometimes the old ways work best precisely because they're old. Jack replied the lesson hard-earned through decades of operational experience. Their surveillance systems are designed to detect digital signatures, electronic communications, predictable movement patterns. They're not looking for horseback messengers or handwritten notes. A ghost of a smile crossed Elizabeth's face, the first such expression since learning of her father's potential involvement. Horseback messengers, are you serious? Completely, Jack confirmed, already calculating logistics. Rebecca, do you have local contacts you trust implicitly? People without obvious connections to intelligence communities? Rebecca considered this briefly. My cousin's family runs a small farm about 10 miles west. Good people, discreet, no digital footprint to speak of. Perfect, Jack approved. We need them to carry a physical message to your FBI contact. No phones, no computers, nothing traceable. The improvised plan began to take shape, old-school tradecraft deployed against modern surveillance capabilities. As they worked through details, Jack maintained awareness of Ben still sleeping peacefully on the sofa, and of Elizabeth, whose professional composure had reasserted itself despite the personal devastation she'd just experienced. The night deepened around the cabin, the forest beyond the windows, an impenetrable wall of darkness. Inside, the unlikely alliance of military veteran, financial executive, and intelligence operative continued their planning, three different worlds temporarily united against a common threat. As dawn approached, Jack stepped onto the cabin's small porch, needing a moment of solitude to process the rapid evolution of their situation. The eastern sky had begun to lighten the first tentative glow of morning, silhouetting the dense pine forest surrounding their temporary sanctuary. The air carried the crisp scent of approaching autumn, fallen leaves, cool earth, and the distant smoke of wood stoves already lit against the morning chill. Jack drew a deep breath, the familiar ritual helping to center his thoughts and clarify immediate priorities. The door opened behind him and Elizabeth joined him on the porch, two steaming mugs in her hands. Coffee, she offered, extending one toward him. It's terrible, but it's hot. Jack accepted the mug with a nod of thanks, noting how Elizabeth had already adapted to their austere circumstances. Her borrowed clothing, practical items from Rebecca's emergency supplies, contrasted sharply with the elegant executive he'd first encountered less than 48 hours ago. How are you holding up? He asked, the question encompassing both her physical condition and the psychological impact of recent revelations. Elizabeth considered this with characteristic thoroughness before responding. Physically, I'm fine. The rest is... She paused, searching for words adequate to describe her current state. Complicated. Jack nodded, understanding the inadequacy of language to capture certain experiences. Combat veterans rarely discussed their internal landscapes with civilians. For precisely this reason, some things defied conventional description. My entire life, Elizabeth continued after a moment, I've defined myself in relation to my father. His approval, his standards, his legacy. Her fingers tightened around the coffee mug. Even when I chose finance instead of medicine, it was about proving I could succeed on his terms. Jack remained silent, recognizing her need to process aloud the seismic shift in her understanding of both her father and herself. Now I have to consider that everything I thought I knew about him might be false. The admission emerged quietly, carrying the weight of fundamental identity recalibration. That the principles he instilled in me, integrity, responsibility, service, might have been nothing but convenient fiction. Might, Jack emphasized, focusing on the uncertainty rather than presumed conclusion. We don't have confirmation yet. Elizabeth's gaze remained fixed on the lightening horizon. The evidence is compelling. Evidence can be manipulated, Jack countered, drawing on decades of operational experience. You should know that better than most right now. The observation landed with visible impact. Elizabeth turned to face him, a new possibility registering in her expression. You think my father might be another target rather than a perpetrator? Jack shrugged, the gesture deliberately understated. I think we've seen how sophisticated these people are at creating false narratives. I think they've demonstrated the ability to plant evidence and manipulate records. And I think presuming guilt before confirming facts is exactly what they want us to do. A complex mixture of emotions crossed Elizabeth's face, hope struggling against pragmatic caution, the daughter battling with the professional analyst. You're suggesting we reserve judgment. I'm suggesting we verify before we convict, Jack clarified, even in our own minds. The simple wisdom born of operational experience, rather than formal education, seemed to reach Elizabeth in ways that perhaps more sophisticated counsel might not have. Her shoulders straightened, slightly, professional resolve reasserting itself. You're right, she acknowledged. We need more information before drawing conclusions. She took a sip of coffee, grimacing slightly at the bitter taste. Thank you for the perspective. Jack nodded once, accepting her gratitude without elaboration. The eastern sky had brightened, further golden light now filtering through the pine branches in distinct rays. A new day, bringing new challenges, new decisions, new consequences. We should wake Ben, Jack said, shifting focus to immediate practicalities. He'll have questions about why we're here. We need a consistent explanation that protects him from unnecessary worry. Elizabeth nodded agreement. What will you tell him? Jack considered this, carefully balancing truth against age-appropriate explanations. That you're helping us with a special project and we needed to use this cabin for a few days. Enough truth to be honest, not enough detail to create fear. He's a perceptive child, Elizabeth observed. Will he accept such a limited explanation? A hint of pride crossed Jack's weathered features. Ben understands that some questions need to wait for answers. Ellen taught him that during her illness, that sometimes, oh, I'll tell you when I can, is the most honest response a parent can offer. The mention of Ellen created a moment of shared understanding between them, the acknowledgement of loss and its lasting impact on those who remain. Without conscious decision, they had begun speaking of Ben as a shared responsibility, their different worlds temporarily united in the protection of one small life. As they turned to re-enter the cabin, the peaceful morning stillness shattered with sudden, catastrophic violence. The explosion ripped through the eastern side of the structure, sending splintered wood and shattered glass in all directions. The concussive force knocked both Jack and Elizabeth off their feet, throwing them against the porch railing with bone-jarring impact. Jack's combat instincts activated instantly. He rolled to a protective position over Elizabeth, shielding her from the secondary debris as his mind processed the tactical situation with combat-honed efficiency. Not an accident. Deliberate attack, remote detonation of pre-positioned explosives, professional methodology. Ben, Elizabeth gasped, already struggling to rise despite Jack's protective weight. The name galvanized Jack into immediate action. He pulled Elizabeth to her feet, and they rushed toward the cabin's damaged entrance, the interior now filled with swirling dust and smoke. The explosion had targeted the communications corner, a precision strike against their technology and connection to outside resources. Ben, Jack called, navigating through debris with practiced efficiency. Rebecca, a child's frightened cry from the rear bedroom, sent Jack moving with athletic speed despite his age. He found Ben huddled in the corner, eyes wide with terror, but physically unharmed. The interior wall had protected him from the blast's direct impact. I've got you, sailor, Jack assured, gathering his son into protective arms. You're okay, I've got you. Rebecca emerged from the bathroom, a bleeding cut across her forehead, but otherwise intact. Perimeter breach, she reported with professional concision. Northeast sector, multiple hostiles advancing. The tactical situation clarified with brutal simplicity. Their safe house had been compromised. Hostile forces were closing in. Their communications equipment was destroyed. Standard protocol dictated immediate evacuation through pre-established escape routes. South exit, Jack directed, already moving toward the cabin's rear door with Ben secured in his arms. Through the ravine, separation protocol if necessary. Elizabeth and Rebecca followed without question, accepting his tactical leadership in this environment where his expertise clearly dominated. They exited into the forest behind the cabin, the morning light filtering through dense foliage to create a dappled camouflage effect. Jack set Ben down, momentarily kneeling to meet his son's frightened gaze. "I need you to be very brave now," he said quietly, his voice calm despite the urgency of their situation. "We're going to play a special game. It's called silent movement. No talking, just following Dad exactly. Can you do that?" Ben nodded, his small face solemn with the intuitive understanding that this was far more serious than any game. Jack squeezed his shoulder once reassurance, pride, love condensed into a single gesture, then lifted him again and moved deeper into the forest. Behind them, muffled voices and the crackle of radio communications indicated their pursuers had reached the cabin. Jack led their small group along a barely visible game trail, his movement reflecting decades of fieldcraft experience, efficient, silent, purposeful. Elizabeth matched his pace despite her unsuitable footwear, corporate executive, transformed into determined survivor by circumstance. Rebecca brought up the rear, occasionally pausing to obscure their trail or listen for pursuit. The morning forest surrounded them with paradoxical beauty, sunlight turning dewdrops into diamonds, on spiderwebs, birdsong, creating a peaceful soundtrack to their desperate flight. Nature, indifferent to human crises, continued its timeless rhythms as four people fought for survival within its boundaries. As they reached a small stream cutting through the forest floor, Jack paused to assess their options. The water offered both opportunity and risk. Following it would mask their scent and footprints, but the open space created exposure to aerial surveillance. "We need to split up," Rebecca stated quietly, the tactical assessment matching Jack's own. "They'll expect us to stay together. Dividing forces creates confusion, multiplies their resource requirements." Jack nodded agreement, though the prospect of separation carried its own dangers. "You two head downstream," he directed. "There's an old fire tower 3 miles south. Defensive position, communication possibilities. Ben and I will move west toward the highway, create a diversion to draw pursuit." Elizabeth's face tightened with immediate objection. "You're putting yourself and Ben directly in their path. I'm putting us on terrain I know, with variables I can control." Jack corrected, the calm certainty in his voice, born of countless similar decisions in combat zones. "They're expecting an executive and an analyst to behave predictably. They're not expecting a combat veteran with local knowledge." The logic was sound, but Elizabeth still hesitated. There must be an alternative that keeps Ben further from danger. "There isn't," Jack stated simply. "Trust me to protect my son. I've been doing it his entire life." The gentle rebuke landed with visible impact. Elizabeth nodded once, acknowledging both his expertise and his paternal authority. "Be careful," she said quietly, the simple phrase carrying unexpected emotional weight. 3 hours, Jack instructed. "If we're not at the fire tower by then, proceed to extraction point Charlie." He turned to Rebecca, who nodded understanding of the reference to their predetermined emergency protocols. As the women prepared to move downstream, Elizabeth approached Ben, who remained secure in his father's arms. "I'll see you soon," she promised, her cultured voice gentling to address the child. "Your dad is very good at this game." Ben managed a small smile despite his evident fear. He was a Navy SEAL, he confided with childish pride, the best of the best. "I know," Elizabeth replied, her eyes meeting Jack's over the boy's head. The simple acknowledgement contained multitudes' respect, confidence, something more complex neither was prepared to name. With a final nod of communication between professionals now united in shared danger, the group separated. Elizabeth and Rebecca disappeared downstream, moving with the quiet efficiency of hunted prey. Jack adjusted Ben's weight in his arms and turned westward, tactical mind, already calculating their best path toward the distant highway. "Ready, sailor?" he asked quietly, assessing his son's emotional state with paternal precision. Ben's small arms tightened around his father's neck, absolute trust evident in the gesture. "Ready, sir," he whispered back, instinctively, matching Jack's operational tone. They moved deeper into the forest, morning light strengthening around them as the sun climbed higher. Behind them, faint shouts indicated their pursuers had discovered their initial trail, the hunt intensifying with each passing minute. Jack's weathered face revealed nothing of his internal calculations as he carried his son away from immediate danger. His expression remained the same calm mask of competence that had guided elite teams through the world's most hostile environments. Yet beneath that professional exterior, something fundamental had shifted. The tactical parameters had expanded beyond mere survival or evidence protection. Now they encompassed not just his son's physical safety, but the welfare of a woman who had somehow, in the space of 48 hours, become essential to his definition of mission success. The revelation should have complicated his decision-making. Instead, it brought crystalline clarity. Jack Thompson, retired Navy SEAL, widowed father, small-town electrician, found himself once again standing on familiar ground, with everything that mattered depending on his next move. Elizabeth followed Rebecca downstream, her designer instincts screaming at the mud soaking her borrowed jeans and the branches tearing at her hair. Yet beneath these superficial discomforts lay a deeper, more visceral fear, not for herself, but for the man and child heading in the opposite direction. The tactical logic of their separation was irrefutable. Jack's decision reflected sound operational judgment. But something beyond logic twisted in Elizabeth's chest as the distance between them increased, a sensation both unfamiliar and overwhelming in its intensity. "Keep moving," Rebecca urged quietly, navigating the stream's edge with practiced efficiency. 2 miles to the fire tower." Elizabeth nodded, forcing her focus back to immediate survival. The morning had grown warmer, sunlight penetrating the forest canopy in brilliant shafts that turned floating dust motes into miniature galaxies. Such beauty amidst such danger, the juxtaposition struck her as profoundly meaningful, though she couldn't articulate precisely why. "Listen," Rebecca commanded, suddenly freezing in place. Elizabeth halted, straining to detect whatever had alerted her companion. At first she heard nothing beyond the natural forest sounds, water over stones, leaves rustling, distant birdsong. Then it registered mechanical whirring, faint but distinct, unmistakable. "Drone," Rebecca confirmed, already scanning the canopy above them. "We need cover, now." They abandoned the stream bed, diving beneath a dense thicket of rhododendron as the sound intensified. Through gaps in the foliage, Elizabeth caught glimpses of the device, a commercial-grade quadcopter equipped with what appeared to be thermal imaging equipment. Sophisticated surveillance deployed with disturbing speed. "They're systematically quartering the area," Rebecca whispered, professional assessment transcending personal fear. "Standard search pattern. They'll have ground teams responding to any thermal signatures the drone identifies." Elizabeth processed this information with the analytical precision that had made her a successful executive. "Options? Limited," Rebecca admitted. "We can't outrun electronic surveillance. We need to mask our signatures or create sufficient false positives to confuse their system." An idea formed in Elizabeth's mind, financial strategy applied to tactical problems. What if we separate their resources further, force them to divide attention across multiple targets? Rebecca studied her with newfound respect. "What are you suggesting?" "I moved toward the eastern ridge," Elizabeth explained, corporate presentation skills evident despite their desperate circumstances. "Create a visible trail, draw their attention. You continue to the fire tower, establish communication with David." "That puts you directly in their path," Rebecca objected, echoing Elizabeth's earlier concern for Jack and Ben. "Exactly," Elizabeth confirmed. "They're looking for me, not you. I become the primary target, drawing resources away from both you and Jack." The tactical assessment was sound, though the personal risk significant. Rebecca considered it briefly, then nodded reluctant approval. "You'll need to evade long enough for us to bring in extraction support. I manage billion-dollar negotiations against hostile corporate raiders," Elizabeth replied, summoning her professional confidence like armor. "I can handle a few mercenaries in the woods." The bravado masked genuine fear, but the strategy remained sound. They quickly established rendezvous coordinates and emergency protocols before preparing to separate. "Elizabeth," Rebecca said quietly, using her real name for the first time. "Be careful. These people are playing by corporate rules." Elizabeth nodded, acknowledging both the warning and the underlying concern. "Neither am I, not anymore." As Rebecca disappeared into the forest undergrowth, continuing toward the distant fire tower, Elizabeth took a moment to center herself. The morning air filled her lungs, clean, sharp, invigorating in its purity. How strange that she felt more alive now in mortal danger than during years of executive privilege. With deliberate movements, she began creating the trail that would draw pursuit, broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, occasional clear footprints in muddy patches. The visible evidence of panicked flight by someone unaccustomed to woodland evasion. The performance wasn't entirely fabricated. Despite her confident assurances to Rebecca, Elizabeth harbored no illusions about her wilderness survival capabilities. Her expertise lay in financial systems and corporate strategy, not fieldcraft and evasion techniques. Yet as she moved through the forest implementing her diversionary plan, a strange calm settled over her. The parameters were clear, the objective defined the stakes unambiguous. In some ways, it was refresher than the nuanced ethical compromises and political maneuvering of corporate leadership. The drone's mechanical whirring intensified, indicating it had detected her movement. Elizabeth continued her calculated retreat toward the eastern ridge, ensuring her trail remained obvious, without appearing deliberately so. The cat-and-mouse game required precise calibration visible enough to draw pursuit not so obvious as to suggest a trap. As she reached the steeper terrain of the ridge's approach, her thoughts returned to Jack and Ben. Were they safe? Had they reached the highway? The concern surprised her with its intensity. These people she'd known less than 48 hours, now central to her emotional landscape, particularly Jack with his weathered competence and uncompromising integrity. So different from the polished executives and financial strategists who populated her usual world. His directness both challenged and anchored her, especially now when everything familiar had been swept away. The sound of voices through the trees interrupted her reflection pursuit, closing in more rapidly than anticipated. Elizabeth increased her pace, pushing deeper into the forest while maintaining her intentionally visible trail. The terrain grew steeper, rocky outcroppings providing both obstacles and potential defensive positions. As she navigated a particularly challenging section, her foot slipped on loose shale, sending her tumbling several yards down the rocky slope. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed awkwardly, the joint twisting beneath her weight. Elizabeth bit back a cry, instinctively understanding that sound would accelerate her discovery. She tested the injury gingerly, painful but functional, likely a sprain rather than fracture. Manageable under normal circumstances, but significantly complicating her current situation. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the crackling of radio communications. Elizabeth forced herself to her feet, ignoring the shooting pain as she continued her retreat. Each step sent fresh agony through her injured ankle, but the alternative capture by Reed's mercenaries provided sufficient motivation to continue. The ridgeline appeared ahead, offering both opportunity and risk. The elevation would provide visibility and potential communication advantages, but also expose her to observation from multiple angles. With pursuit closing from behind, however, options had narrowed considerably. Elizabeth reached the ridgeline as the sun approached its zenith, the forest falling away on either side to reveal spectacular vistas of rolling Connecticut woodland. Under different circumstances, she might have appreciated the natural beauty. Now she scanned desperately for defensive options or escape routes. A cluster of boulders near the ridge's highest point offered the only available cover. Elizabeth limped toward them, each step an exercise in pain management and stubborn determination. As she reached their shelter, the voices behind her grew distinct enough to discern individual words. Thermal signature ahead, stationary now. Movement pattern suggests injury. Proceed with caution. Subject potentially armed. Elizabeth almost laughed at the last assessment. Armed with what corporate strategy and financial regulations, she had never even held a weapon before borrowing Jack's backup pistol the previous night. From her position among the boulders, she could see 3 men ascending the ridge toward her location. Their movements reflected professional training, coordinated, efficient, purposeful. Not ordinary security personnel, but specialized operators, confirming David's assessment of the resources arrayed against them. Elizabeth's options had narrowed to a single desperate gamble. If she could keep these pursuers occupied long enough, both Jack and Rebecca might reach safety. The mission parameters had evolved from personal survival to protecting those now depending on her diversionary action. The realization brought unexpected clarity. For years, she had defined success through profit margins and market share, measuring achievement in quarterly reports and stock valuations. Now, success meant something far simpler and infinitely more meaningful, ensuring the safety of a man and his son who had risked everything to help her. As the pursuers approached her position among the ridge boulders, Elizabeth pressed herself deeper into the natural shelter. Each heartbeat seemed to echo in her ears, drowning out even the sound of her own ragged breathing. The pain in her ankle had settled into a steady, insistent throb, manageable for now, but a significant liability if quick movement became necessary. This wasn't boardroom pressure. This wasn't negotiating a difficult merger or facing hostile shareholders. This was primal survival, a realm where her years of executive experience offered little advantage. "Fan out," one of the men directed, his voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "She's injured. Can't have gone far." The clinical assessment of her vulnerability sent a chill through Elizabeth's body that had nothing to do with the morning air. These weren't ordinary security personnel. Their coordinated movements, communication discipline, and tactical positioning reflected specialized training. Marcus Reed had deployed serious resources, the kind that didn't ask questions and left no witnesses. Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly as she pressed them against the cool stone surface, steadying herself physically if not emotionally. The boulders offered temporary concealment, but no true protection, no escape route, no tactical advantage. Her diversionary plan had succeeded too well, drawing pursuit directly to her with no extraction strategy. She thought of Jack and Ben. Had they reached safety? Was her sacrifice, if that's what this was becoming, serving its purpose? The uncertainty was almost as unbearable as her immediate danger. "Movement," one of the pursuers called. 3 o'clock boulder formation." They'd spotted her. Elizabeth's throat tightened, her pulse accelerating to a painful rhythm. Options collapsed to nothing. Run on an injured ankle. Impossible. Fight against trained operatives. Absurd. Surrender and hope for mercy from people who had already demonstrated their ruthlessness. Unlikely. The approaching footsteps sounded like a countdown to her capture. Elizabeth straightened her posture, summoning the composed dignity that had carried her through countless professional crises. If this was to be her end, she would face it with the same poise she'd maintained in boardrooms and executive suites. "I have visual, the closest operative, confirmed now less than 20 yards from her position. Coming in." The sound of a rifle shot cracked through the morning air, like thunder, sending birds exploding from nearby trees in panicked flight. The bullet struck rock inches from the lead pursuer, spraying granite fragments in a deadly shower. The men instantly dropped into defensive positions, weapons drawn, scanning for the source of the unexpected threat. Elizabeth remained frozen, confusion temporarily overriding fear. The shot hadn't been directed at her, nor had it struck any of her pursuers, a warning then, but from whom a second shot followed, this one striking even closer to the lead operative, leaving no doubt about the shooter's capabilities. Whoever had fired could have easily eliminated the threat, but had chosen intimidation instead. "This is private property," a woman's voice called from the tree line to Elizabeth's left. "You are trespassing on a posted wildlife sanctuary with unauthorized weapons. Identify yourselves immediately." The commanding tone, unmistakably military in its authority, carried across the ridge with precision. Elizabeth caught a glimpse of movement among the trees, but nothing clear enough to identify. "Ma'am, this is a private security operation," one of the men called back, attempting to establish legitimate purpose. "We're retrieving a fugitive wanted for financial crimes." "With tactical gear and unregistered weapons," the woman countered. "Without court orders or law enforcement presence, I don't think so." Another pause followed by, "You have 30 seconds to withdraw before I contact the state police. I've already documented your presence with high-resolution imaging." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Elizabeth could see the lead operative communicating via a throat microphone, receiving instructions from whoever coordinated their operation. Finally, he made a sharp hand gesture to his companions. "This isn't over," he called toward Elizabeth's position. "We'll be back with proper documentation." "You do that," the woman's voice replied, steel beneath the calm surface. "I'll have my lawyers waiting." The pursuers began a tactical withdrawal, moving with the disciplined precision of professionals. They maintained defensive positions as they retreated, clearly unwilling to fully abandon their mission, but equally unwilling to escalate against an unknown defender with superior position. Only when they had disappeared into the forest did Elizabeth's mysterious protector emerge from cover. A woman, perhaps in her late 50s, approached with the measured confidence of someone thoroughly comfortable in wilderness settings. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and she carried a high-powered rifle with the casual familiarity of long experience. Everything about her, from her weathered outdoor clothing to her alert, assessing gaze, suggested military background. "They'll be back," the woman stated without preamble, scanning the ridgeline with practiced vigilance. "With reinforcements and possibly fabricated documentation. We need to move." Elizabeth struggled to her feet, wincing as her injured ankle protested the movement. "Who are you, Garky?" "Margaret Sullivan," the woman replied, already moving to assist Elizabeth. "Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army, retired. This ridge marks the boundary of my property." She offered a steadying arm with matter-of-fact efficiency. "You're Elizabeth Harrison. The question is, why you're being hunted by private military contractors in my woods?" Elizabeth's surprise must have been evident as Margaret continued without waiting for confirmation. "Yes, I recognize you. Financial news isn't my usual reading, but a CEO on the run makes headlines." Her assessment was direct but not accusatory. Those men weren't ordinary security. Their movement patterns and equipment suggest specialized training. Expensive resources for a simple fraud case. "It's more complicated than the news reports suggest," Elizabeth replied, accepting both the physical support and the implicit judgment in Margaret's assessment. "It always is." Margaret acknowledged her tone, suggesting personal experience with such complexities. She examined Elizabeth's ankle with clinical efficiency. "Bad sprain. You're lucky it's not broken. Can you walk with assistance?" Elizabeth nodded, though the prospect seemed daunting. "I don't have much choice." "There's always a choice," Margaret corrected, adjusting her position to better support Elizabeth's weight. "Sometimes all the options are just equally unpleasant." She gestured toward the western ridge. "My cabin's about a mile from here. Defensible position, communication capabilities, medical supplies. We need to move before they reorganize." As they began their difficult journey across the rugged terrain, Elizabeth's thoughts returned to Jack and Ben. Had they reached safety? Was the fire tower secure? The separation that had seemed tactically sound now felt like a devastating miscalculation. "I'm not alone," Elizabeth said, the admission emerging from growing concern rather than tactical calculation. "There's a man and his son, and another woman. We separated to divide pursuit." Margaret nodded, unsurprised by this information. The separation was smart, standard evasion protocol. She maintained their steady pace despite the challenging landscape. Military background. The man, yes, former Navy SEAL. Pride colored Elizabeth's voice without conscious intent. Jack Thompson. Margaret stopped abruptly, turning to study Elizabeth with new intensity. Jack Thompson, from Millbrook, electrician widower with a young son. Elizabeth's surprise must have been evident as Margaret continued without waiting for confirmation. "Small world," she observed, resuming their progress along the ridge. "Jack and I served together on the Millbrook Volunteer Emergency Response Team after the flood 3 years ago. Good man, solid judgment." The coincidental connection seemed simultaneously implausible and perfectly aligned with the strange synchronicity that had characterized this entire experience. First Caroline's rescue, now this unexpected link between Jack and their current protector. "I need to warn him," Elizabeth said, urgency overriding her physical discomfort. "The people hunting us, they're more organized, better equipped than we anticipated." "First things first," Margaret replied, the pragmatic response of someone accustomed to crisis management. "Secure position, treat injuries, establish communication. Panicked reactions get people killed." The blunt assessment landed with the weight of experience behind it. Elizabeth nodded, accepting both the wisdom and the implied rebuke. She had built her career on disciplined analysis and strategic patience. Those same qualities would serve her now, despite the emotional urgency of her concern for Jack and Ben. After what seemed an eternity of painful progress, they crested a small rise to reveal Margaret's cabin, a substantial structure combining rustic aesthetics with practical functionality. Solar panels gleamed on the southern exposure, while a small satellite dish suggested communication capabilities beyond ordinary civilian requirements. The surrounding clearing had been carefully maintained to provide both visibility and defensible perimeter. "Home," Margaret announced, simply guiding Elizabeth toward the broad porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the structure. "Not as isolated as it appears. I have connections that will interest you." Once inside, Margaret efficiently treated Elizabeth's injured ankle, cleaning, examining, and wrapping it with the practiced movements of someone with medical field training. The cabin's interior reflected its owner's background, practical, organized with subtle indicators of military service integrated into the decor. A shadow box containing medals and insignia, a bookshelf dominated by tactical and strategic texts, Framed photographs showing a younger Margaret in desert camouflage. Former intelligence, Elizabeth observed, connecting the visible evidence with Margaret's demeanor and capabilities. Margaret glanced up from her medical ministrations, a slight smile acknowledging the accuracy of Elizabeth's assessment. 27 years, Special Activities Division, officially retired 3 years ago, but certain connections remain active. The revelation shifted Elizabeth's tactical assessment significantly. Active enough to help 4 people being hunted by private military contractors backed by major financial institutions. Margaret completed the ankle wrapping before responding, her movements precise and economical. That depends on the legitimacy of their cause and the evidence supporting their claims. She met Elizabeth's gaze directly. I don't involve myself in corporate power struggles or financial crimes without compelling national interest. This goes beyond corporate crime, Elizabeth countered, certainty growing as she articulated the pattern David had identified. The targeted pension funds, the coordination across multiple firms, the resources deployed for retrieval, this has national security implications. Margaret's expression revealed nothing, but her silence encouraged Elizabeth to continue. They're systematically targeting funds supporting military personnel, first responders, and government employees. Elizabeth explained financial analysis skills applying to this new context. Creating vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure support systems. That's not random criminal opportunity. The retired intelligence officer absorbed this assessment with professional neutrality. Interesting theory, evidence. On a flash drive currently with Jack, Elizabeth replied. Preliminary analysis shows coordinated action across 4 major investment firms, all targeting similar pension funds using identical methodologies. Margaret nodded once decision apparently made. Time to find your seal, then. She moved to a locked cabinet near the cabin's entrance, retrieving what appeared to be specialized communication equipment. Let's see if we can raise the fire tower. As Margaret established communication protocols, Elizabeth felt the weight of recent revelations pressing against her professional composure. The possibility of her father's involvement remained the most personally devastating aspect of an already traumatic situation. William Harrison had defined Elizabeth's understanding of integrity and responsibility throughout her life. His exacting standards had shaped her professional development and personal ethics. The thought that he might be complicit in exploiting the very people whose service he had always publicly honored seemed fundamentally impossible. Yet the evidence existed, the patterns matched. The statistical improbability of identical fraud methodologies appearing independently at both Meridian and Sentinel strained credibility beyond breaking point. Elizabeth, Margaret's voice broke through her troubled reflection. I've established contact with the fire tower. Your friend Rebecca is there, but Jack and his son haven't arrived. The simple statement sent ice through Elizabeth's veins. They should have reached the tower before us. Jack knew the terrain better than anyone. Margaret's expression revealed nothing of her personal concern, maintaining professional focus. Rebecca reports no contact since your separation this morning. No indication of pursuit or capture, but no confirmation of their status either. Elizabeth struggled to her feet despite her injured ankle, panic overriding physical discomfort. We need to find them. Now. Agreed, Margaret replied, already gathering tactical equipment with practiced efficiency. But not you. That ankle makes you a liability in search operations. The assessment was tactically sound but emotionally unacceptable. I'm not staying behind while Jack and Ben are missing. Margaret paused in her preparations, studying Elizabeth with newfound respect. You care about them, particularly Jack. It wasn't a question, and Elizabeth saw no point in denial. Yes, the simple admission, perhaps the most honest statement she'd made in years, hung between them like a challenge and a revelation both. Margaret nodded once, accepting its significance without further comment. Then you serve them best by maintaining your position here, coordinating communication and planning next steps. The retired officer's voice softened slightly. I know these woods better than anyone. If Jack and Ben are out there, I'll find them. The logic was irrefutable, though emotionally unsatisfying. Elizabeth nodded reluctant acceptance, recognizing that her corporate stubbornness had no place in tactical decision-making where lives hung in the balance. As Margaret continued her preparations for the search operation, Elizabeth moved to the cabin's large front window, gazing out at the forest that had transformed from scenic backdrop to operational environment in the space of a single day. Somewhere within those thousands of acres, Jack and Ben Thompson were either safely navigating toward rendezvous or facing dangers Elizabeth could only imagine. The uncertainty created a hollow sensation beneath her ribs, the physical manifestation of concern for people who had somehow become essential to her definition of mission success. The tactical landscape had expanded beyond evidence protection or personal exoneration. Now it encompassed the welfare of a man and child who had risked everything to help a stranger. The realization brought both clarity and vulnerability, emotional investment, complicating tactical assessment in ways Elizabeth's executive experience hadn't prepared her to manage. "I'll find them," Margaret assured her tactical gear, now fully assembled. "My communication protocol is simple radio check every 30 minutes. Channel 3 is encrypted, limited range, but secure." She handed Elizabeth a small handheld device. "If anything changes here, if Rebecca makes contact, if you observe any unusual activity, immediate notification." "Understood." Elizabeth nodded, accepting both the radio and the responsibility it represented. The simple exchange, practical equipment transfer, rather than emotional reassurance, somehow provided more comfort than well-intentioned platitudes might have offered. As Margaret disappeared into the forest, moving with the silent efficiency of someone trained to navigate hostile territory undetected, Elizabeth found herself alone with her thoughts and fears. The cabin's comfortable interior now seemed oppressively quiet, the absence of Jack and Ben's presence amplifying her concern for their safety. She forced herself to focus on practical tasks, monitoring the communication equipment, studying the topographical maps Margaret had left on the table, assessing potential scenarios and appropriate responses. The methodical approach, applying executive skills to tactical situation, provided structure amid emotional uncertainty. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Margaret's regular radio check-ins provided minimal reassurance, no sign of Jack and Ben, but no evidence of capture either. The ambiguity maintained both hope and fear in equal measure, each feeding the other in continuous cycle. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the cabin clearing, Elizabeth found herself remembering Jack's words from the previous night. "Sometimes the best place to hide is exactly where no one would expect to find you." Was that what Jack had done? Hidden himself and Ben in some location so unexpected that even Margaret's experienced search patterns hadn't identified it. The radio crackled to life, interrupting her speculation. "Base, this is Pathfinder. I've found something in signs of passage through the North Ravine. Recent. Could be our people. Investigating now. Over." Elizabeth's heart lurched, hope and fear colliding in equal measure. "Understood, Pathfinder. Keep me informed. Over." The 30 minutes until the next scheduled check-in stretched into an eternity. Elizabeth paced the cabin despite her injured ankle, unable to maintain the disciplined calm that had defined her professional life. When the radio finally crackled again, she lunged for it with embarrassing eagerness. "Base Pathfinder, contact established, package secure, returning to base, ETA 90 minutes, prepare medical supplies, minor injuries only. Over." Relief washed through Elizabeth with such force that her knees weakened, forcing her to grip the table edge for support. "Understood, Pathfinder. Base standing by. Over." Jack and Ben were alive, safe, coming here. The simple fact overwhelmed all other considerations: strategic planning, evidence, validation, the complex web of financial fraud they were fighting. For this moment, only their safety mattered. Elizabeth moved with renewed purpose, gathering the medical supplies Margaret had indicated and preparing the cabin for their arrival. The practical task provided outlet for the energy generated by relief and anticipation both. The sun had fully set, night settling across the forest when Elizabeth heard movement outside the cabin. She positioned herself near the window, Margaret's spare pistol in hand, caution overriding optimism despite the positive radio reports. The door opened to reveal Margaret supporting Jack, who limped noticeably but remained upright through evident determination. Ben followed closely, his small face reflecting exhaustion but showing no signs of physical injury. "Ben!" Elizabeth exclaimed, setting aside the weapon to move toward them despite her own injured ankle. "Jack, thank God." Ben's face brightened at the sight of her fatigue momentarily forgotten. "Ms. Sophie, you're okay?" He rushed forward, wrapping his arms around her waist in a spontaneous embrace that caught Elizabeth entirely by surprise. Her hands hovered uncertainly for a moment before settling gently on the boy's shoulders, the unfamiliar gesture of affection generating unexpected emotion. "I'm fine," she assured him, voice unsteady. "Just a sprained ankle. I was so worried about you both." Jack's weathered face revealed little, but his eyes meeting hers over Ben's head conveyed volumes. Relief, exhaustion. Something deeper neither was prepared to name. "Sit," Margaret directed, guiding Jack to a chair and with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone accustomed to managing medical situations. "Leg wound needs proper cleaning. You've been ignoring it for hours." "It's just a graze," Jack protested, though he complied with her instruction. "Through and through, no major damage." "You were shot?" Elizabeth asked, alarm resurging, despite their evident safety. Jack shrugged the gesture, deliberately minimizing. "Ambush at the ravine crossing. Sloppy work on their part. We evaded along the ridgeline." The casual description of lethal danger sent a chill through Elizabeth's body. While she had been safely ensconced in Margaret's cabin, Jack had been actively protecting Ben from armed pursuers, sustaining injury in the process. "Drink," Margaret ordered, pressing a mug of steaming liquid into Jack's hands as she prepared to treat his wound. "Willow bark tea, natural anti-inflammatory. Tastes terrible but works." As Margaret cut away the makeshift bandage Jack had applied, Elizabeth guided Ben to the small kitchen area, providing distraction from his father's treatment. "Are you hungry?" she asked, opening cabinets to survey available options. Ben nodded, fatigue evident in his drooping shoulders. "Dad said we couldn't stop for food. Had to keep moving." The simple statement carried no complaint, just factual reporting from a child who had clearly risen to extraordinary circumstances. Elizabeth found bread and canned soup simple fare, but nourishing. As she prepared the meal, she maintained conversation with Ben, drawing out details of their ordeal while keeping his focus away from Jack's medical treatment. "Dad carried me across the big rocks," Ben recounted, eyes widening at the memory. "Then we hid in a fallen tree when the bad men came. They walked right past us. Dad says I was the best mission partner ever because I stayed completely silent." Elizabeth nodded, genuine admiration in her response. "That's incredible, Ben. You were very brave." "Dad says brave isn't about not being scared," Ben explained with the solemn wisdom of childhood. "It's about doing what needs done, even when you are scared." The insight, clearly a lesson passed from father to son, struck Elizabeth with unexpected force. How many truly brave moments had she experienced in her privileged life? Corporate risk-taking with other people's money hardly compared to Jack's protection of his son against armed pursuers. From the main room, she could hear Margaret's quiet professional voice as she treated Jack's injury, his occasional terse responses revealing little discomfort despite what must have been significant pain. The stoicism, not for his own benefit, but to avoid alarming Ben, added another dimension to Elizabeth's evolving understanding of Jack Thompson. When the soup was ready, Elizabeth served Ben at the small kitchen table, then prepared a bowl for Jack. She carried it to where Margaret was finishing the bandaging process, clean white gauze, now replacing the improvised dressing Jack had applied in the field. "You should eat," Elizabeth said, offering the bowl with an awkwardness foreign to her usually confident demeanor. Jack accepted it with a nod of thanks, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "You're okay?" he asked quietly, the simple question encompassing both physical condition and emotional state. "I'm fine," she assured him, though the tremor in her voice betrayed the emotional toll of the day's events. "Margaret found me before Reed's people could. I was more worried about you and Ben." Jack's expression softened slightly. "Ben did great, better than great. Kept his head, followed instructions, maintained noise, discipline." Pride colored his voice, temporarily overshadowing pain and exhaustion both. "Natural operator, that kid." The evident bond between father and son strengthened, rather than damaged by their ordeal, created a sharp contrast with Elizabeth's own relationship with her father. William Harrison had never shown such uncomplicated pride in her achievements, always finding some aspect that could have been improved, some standard not quite met. Margaret finished securing the bandage and gathered her medical supplies with practiced efficiency. "You'll live," she informed Jack, with the matter-of-fact assessment of someone who had treated far worse injuries. "But no weight on that leg for 24 hours. Doctor's orders." Jack's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "You're not a doctor." Combat medic, Margaret corrected, which means I won't coddle you, but I know what I'm talking about. She moved toward the communications equipment in the corner. I need to update Rebecca and your technical specialist. We're consolidating here for the night, then making decisions in the morning. As Margaret established communication protocols, Elizabeth settled into the chair beside Jack, her injured ankle propped on a footstool Margaret had provided earlier. The parallel nature of their injuries, her sprained ankle, his bullet wound seemed somehow appropriate, different magnitudes of damage, reflecting their different worlds and experiences. Thank you, she said quietly, pitching her voice below Ben's hearing. For protecting him, for coming back safely. Jack studied her face, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. We protect what matters, he replied simply. The statement hung between them, its potential meanings expanding beyond the immediate context. Elizabeth found herself unable to maintain his gaze, looking instead to where Ben sat finishing his soup, exhaustion evident in his drooping shoulders. He should sleep, she observed, maternal instinct surprising her with its intensity. Jack nodded agreement. Ben, he called softly, time for bed, sailor. The boy looked up, ready to protest, but betrayed by an enormous yawn that transformed his objection into reluctant acceptance. Where am I sleeping? Margaret, returning from her communication task, gestured toward a small side room. Guest quarters through there. Military-style bunk. Not fancy, but functional. As Ben prepared for bed using the toothbrush and small toiletry kit Margaret provided with unexpected foresight, Jack updated Elizabeth on their experience since the separation that morning. Reed's people were more numerous than we anticipated. He explained, his voice pitched for her ears alone. 3 teams, not one. Coordinated search pattern. We evaded the first team at the ravine crossing, but the second caught our trail near the western ridge. That's when you were shot, Elizabeth surmised, remembering his earlier casual reference to the ambush. Jack nodded the gesture, understating the deadly reality. Careless shooting on their part, more interested in capture than elimination, which worked in our favor. His weathered face hardened slightly. Though I can't say I returned the courtesy when they threatened Ben. The implication that Jack had been forced to engage directly with their pursuers added another dimension to Elizabeth's understanding of the day's events. While she had been hiding among boulders, Jack had been actively protecting his son with lethal force if necessary. Reed's resources go beyond ordinary corporate security. Jack continued his tactical assessment, professional, despite his evident exhaustion. These are specialized operators, likely former military with significant experience. The equipment, coordination, and persistence which suggests substantial backing, which confirms David's analysis, Elizabeth noted. This isn't just financial fraud, it's something more systematic with broader implications. And higher stakes, Jack agreed. People willing to deploy these kinds of resources aren't concerned about SEC investigations or public relations. They're protecting something worth killing for. The blunt assessment hung between them, its implications extending far beyond their immediate safety concerns. Whatever they had stumbled upon, whatever conspiracy linked Meridian Capital Sentinel Group and the other firms David had identified, represented a threat significant enough to justify extraordinary measures to contain it. Ben returned from the bathroom, pajama-clad and heavy-eyed with exhaustion. Jack started to rise, but Margaret intervened with quiet authority. Stay off that leg, she reminded him. I'll get him settled. To Elizabeth's surprise, Ben accepted Margaret's assistance without protest. Something in the retired officer's manner, apparently inspiring the same confidence, Jack commanded. As they disappeared into the small bedroom, Jack's gaze followed his son with an expression of mingled pride and fierce protectiveness that tightened Elizabeth's throat with unexpected emotion. He's extraordinary, she said softly. So resilient, so brave. Jack's weathered face softened momentarily. Kids are tougher than we give them credit for. Adaptable, present-focused. A hint of pride colored his voice. Ben understood the stakes today. Not the complex details, but the essential truth that we needed to evade and survive. He rose to that challenge without hesitation. The simple praise, honest appreciation, rather than the critical assessment Elizabeth had grown accustomed to from her own father, highlighted yet another contrast between their worlds. William Harrison had never acknowledged effort without qualification, always finding some aspect that could have been improved, some standard not quite met. Margaret returned from settling Ben, her practical demeanor immediately refocusing their attention on operational matters. Rebecca reports your technical specialist has completed preliminary analysis. She informed them, retrieving a notepad where she had recorded key points. The evidence confirms coordinated action across 4 investment firms, all targeting similar pension funds using identical methodologies, including Sentinel Group, Elizabeth said quietly. The confirmation of her father's potential involvement still raw, despite intellectual preparation. Margaret nodded, her expression revealing nothing of her personal assessment. The pattern suggests systematic exploitation rather than opportunistic fraud. The targeting of specific pension categories, military first responders, civil service indicates strategic selection rather than random criminality. Jack absorbed this information with the disciplined focus of a professional tactician. Objectives beyond financial gain. Your specialist suggests 2 possibilities, Margaret replied, consulting her notes. First, simple profit motivation. These funds represent billions in managed assets with withdrawal restrictions that make unauthorized transfers difficult to detect for extended periods. And the second, Elizabeth prompted, sensing the more significant implication. Margaret's expression turned grave. Destabilization of critical infrastructure support systems. By compromising retirement security for essential personnel categories, the operation potentially creates vulnerability in national security frameworks. The assessment landed with seismic force. What had begun as Elizabeth's personal crisis, Marcus Reed's betrayal and fraudulent framing had expanded to reveal systematic targeting of funds supporting the very people responsible for national protection and emergency response. That's not corporate crime, Jack stated, the flat certainty in his voice reflecting decades of security experience. That's asymmetric warfare, economic destabilization as prelude to more direct action. Margaret nodded agreement, professional recognition passing between them, which elevates our situation considerably. This isn't just about clearing Elizabeth's name or exposing financial fraud. It's potentially about national security. The implications expanded beyond anything Elizabeth had anticipated when she'd first discovered discrepancies in Meridian's transaction records. Her father's potential involvement, the personal betrayal that had seemed so devastating just hours ago, now paled against the broader conspiracy they appeared to have uncovered. What's our next move? She asked, executive instinct asserting itself despite physical exhaustion and emotional turmoil. Margaret and Jack exchanged a brief glance, professional assessment passing between them without need for elaboration. We need more information before committing to action, Margaret replied, the methodical response of someone trained in intelligence operations. Your technical specialist is continuing analysis. Rebecca is coordinating secure channels for evidence transmission. By morning, we should have clearer understanding of both the conspiracy's scope and our optimal response options. And in the meantime, Elizabeth pressed corporate impatience, struggling against tactical reality. In the meantime, we rest, Jack stated, the simple directive carrying the weight of operational experience. Exhaustion compromises judgment, creates vulnerability. We've secured temporary safety, established communication with our resources, and confirmed the significance of what we've discovered. Strategic planning happens after recovery. The pragmatic assessment, prioritizing human needs over immediate action, ran counter to Elizabeth's executive instincts. In her world, crisis demanded immediate response, extended work hours, sleep, sacrifice to solution development. Yet as she observed Jack's evident exhaustion, the subtle indicators visible beneath his disciplined exterior, she recognized the wisdom in his approach. They had survived immediate danger, gained valuable allies, confirmed the significance of their evidence. The next phase required clear thinking and optimal physical condition, not heroic but impaired effort. You're right, she acknowledged, the concession coming more easily than anticipated. We all need rest. Margaret nodded approval, already moving to prepare sleeping arrangements. Main room for you too, she directed, indicating the comfortable sofa and an adjacent recliner. I'll take the loft. Tactical positions, sight lines to all approaches. The matter-of-fact distribution, practical rather than conventional, reflected their operational priorities rather than social considerations. Jack would be positioned to protect Ben in the side room. Margaret would maintain perimeter security from the elevated loft. Elizabeth would remain within communication range of both. As Margaret ascended to her selected position, Jack settled into the recliner, adjusting to accommodate his injured leg. Elizabeth took the sofa, grateful to finally elevate her throbbing ankle properly. Night had fully claimed the forest beyond the cabin windows, darkness pressing against the glass like a physical presence. Within the cabin's secure perimeter, soft lighting created an island of safety amid unseen dangers, a temporary sanctuary while larger threats gathered beyond their immediate horizon. "Your friend Margaret," Elizabeth said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "She's more than a retired lieutenant colonel." Jack's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "Special Activities Division. Intelligence Community's Direct Action Component. The people they send when diplomacy fails and military action isn't feasible." Elizabeth absorbed this additional context, recalibrating her assessment of their unexpected ally. "She recognized you, mentioned working together after a flood." Jack nodded, memories evident in his expression. 3 years ago, Connecticut River overflowed, took out half of Millbrook's east side. Margaret coordinated civilian evacuation while I handled emergency electrical systems. A hint of respect colored his voice. "She ran that operation like a military campaign. Saved a lot of lives." The connection between them, professional recognition, transcending their different service branches, added another dimension to Elizabeth's understanding of the communities existing beyond her corporate world. These people operated according to codes and principles entirely separate from financial regulations and shareholder interests. "Will she help us?" Elizabeth asked the question, encompassing both immediate safety and longer-term resolution. Jack considered this his assessment, neither immediately optimistic nor dismissive. "Margaret makes decisions based on mission parameters, not personal considerations. If she determines that what we've uncovered represents genuine threat to national interests, she'll engage fully." He paused, adding with quiet certainty, "And you don't want more committed ally when that happens." The assessment provided qualified reassurance. Their safety, their very survival, now depended on convincing Margaret Sullivan that the financial conspiracy they'd uncovered warranted her professional intervention. "You should sleep," Jack suggested, noting Elizabeth's evident exhaustion despite her attempts to maintain composure. "Tomorrow will demand a clear thinking and sound judgment. Both require rest." The simple advice, practical rather than patronizing, reflected Jack's fundamental approach to all challenges. Identify essential requirements. Address them methodically. Maintain focus on controllable factors rather than hypothetical concerns. Elizabeth nodded agreement, settling more comfortably on the sofa as Jack dimmed the lights to create better sleeping conditions. The cabin fell into comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional rustle as they adjusted positions to accommodate their respective injuries. Yet despite physical exhaustion, Elizabeth found herself unable to surrender to sleep. Her mind continued processing the day's revelations, particularly the evidence suggesting her father's involvement in the conspiracy they'd uncovered. "Jack," she said softly, uncertain if he remained awake, "do you think it's possible to completely misread someone you've known your entire life?" The question emerged from the darkness, vulnerable in ways Elizabeth rarely permitted herself to be. For a moment, she thought Jack had already fallen asleep, the silence extending until she'd almost withdrawn the inquiry from consideration. "Yes," he replied, finally, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. "But it's equally possible to create narratives that fit evidence without capturing truth." The measured response, neither false reassurance nor harsh reality, reflected the balanced judgment that had drawn Elizabeth to seek his help in the first place. "The evidence against my father seems compelling." She continued the darkness, somehow making the painful admission easier to articulate. "The transaction patterns at Sentinel mirror those at Meridian exactly. The statistical improbability of coincidence." "Statistics quantify probability, not certainty," Jack interrupted gently. "Throughout my military career, I witnessed seemingly impossible coincidences occur with surprising frequency." His voice softened further. "Evidence matters, patterns matter, but context matters more." What context could possibly explain identical fraud methodologies at both firms? Elizabeth challenged professional skepticism, reasserting itself. "Many possibilities." Jack replied, the hypothetical scenarios reflecting his tactical thinking. "Your father could be another target rather than a willing participant, could be under coercion or manipulation, could be unaware of activities occurring within his organization, could be deliberately creating parallel evidence to reveal the broader conspiracy." The alternative interpretations, each theoretically viable, despite varying probabilities offered perspective, Elizabeth's emotional response had overlooked. In her shock at discovering potential connection between her father and the fraud she'd uncovered, she had defaulted to the most devastating interpretation without considering other possibilities. The tactical lesson applies to personal relationships as well. Jack continued, his voice carrying the gentle wisdom of hard-earned experience. Never commit to conclusions before gathering complete intelligence. Maintaining operational flexibility requires considering all possibilities, even those that contradict initial assessment. The insight military principles applied to emotional challenges provided unexpected comfort. Elizabeth had spent her entire professional life analyzing data, identifying patterns, drawing conclusions. Yet in this most personal crisis, she had abandoned that disciplined approach in favor of emotional reaction. "Thank you," she said simply, gratitude extending beyond the immediate advice to encompass everything Jack had done since their paths had crossed in that storm-drenched basement. Silence settled between them again, more comfortable than before. The cabin's interior had fallen into darkness, only the faint glow of emergency lighting illuminating their temporary sanctuary. Outside, the forest continued its nighttime rhythms, wound through pine branches, occasional animal movements, the distant call of a hunting owl. "Jack," Elizabeth said again, the question forming before she could reconsider its propriety. "After Ellen died, how did you manage with Ben with everything?" The inquiry emerged from genuine curiosity rather than conversational obligation. How had this man, widowed, raising a child alone, building a life from personal tragedy, developed the steadfast certainty that now anchored their unlikely alliance? The silence extended so long that Elizabeth feared she had overstepped some unspoken boundary. When Jack finally responded, his voice carried a depth of emotion, carefully controlled, but not entirely concealed. "One day at a time," he said quietly, "sometimes 1 hour at a time. You identify what matters most for me, that was Ben, and you build everything else around that core priority." A pause then, with subtle emphasis. "And you learn to distinguish between what you can control and what you can't." The simple wisdom, born of grief and responsibility, both resonated with Elizabeth's current circumstances. She couldn't control her father's actions or involvement. Couldn't control Marcus Reed's betrayal or the broader conspiracy they'd uncovered. Couldn't even control the immediate dangers surrounding them. But she could control her response, her decisions, her commitment to exposing truth regardless of personal cost. Just as Jack had controlled his response to devastating loss, focusing on what remained rather than what had been taken. "I'm sorry about Ellen." Elizabeth offered the inadequate words, all she had to acknowledge his loss. "She must have been extraordinary." "She was," Jack confirmed, unexpected warmth entering his voice. "Brilliant, compassionate, completely fearless in pursuing what mattered to her." A pause then, with quiet certainty. "She would have liked you." The simple assessment, offered without elaboration or qualification, created an unexpected connection across time and circumstance. Ellen Thompson, molecular biologist and beloved wife, somehow linked to Elizabeth Harrison, financial executive and virtual stranger, through the man who connected them. Elizabeth found herself wondering what kind of woman had captured Jack Thompson's heart so completely that her absence remained palpable years after her death. What shared values and experiences had forged a bond strong enough to transcend Ellen's physical presence? What qualities in Elizabeth could possibly remind Jack of the woman he had loved and lost? Before she could formulate response, a soft sound from the guest room interrupted their conversation, Ben calling for his father in the distinctive voice of a child awakening from unsettling dreams. "Dad." The single syllable carried both vulnerability and absolute trust that help would come. "Excuse me," Jack said quietly, already rising despite his injured leg. "Duty calls." Elizabeth watched as he limped toward his son's room, prioritizing Ben's needs above his own discomfort, without hesitation or resentment. The simple act of parental devotion, responding to a child's call, despite personal hardship, embodied everything she had come to respect about Jack Thompson. After Jack disappeared into the guest room, Elizabeth finally surrendered to the exhaustion she had been fighting. As sleep claimed her, her thoughts remained with the man and boy in the adjacent room, these unlikely allies who had risked everything to help her and who had somehow become essential to her definition of success beyond any professional achievement. Morning arrived with the soft golden light of early autumn filtering through the cabin windows to illuminate their temporary sanctuary. Elizabeth awakened to find Margaret already moving efficiently through the kitchen area, preparing coffee with the focused precision she applied to all tasks. Status, Elizabeth asked, executive habits reasserting themselves despite the unusual circumstances. Margaret glanced up, assessing Elizabeth's condition with clinical efficiency. Perimeter secure, no indication of pursuit during night hours. Your technical specialist has transmitted updated analysis. She gestured toward papers stacked neatly on the table. And Rebecca has established secure evacuation protocols when we're ready to move. The concise briefing, professional rather than conversational, reflected Margaret's military background. Essential information delivered without embellishment or unnecessary detail. Jack and Ben, Elizabeth inquired, concern evident, despite attempts at casual tone. Still sleeping. Margaret replied, a hint of softness entering her otherwise practical demeanor. The boy had nightmares. Jack stayed with him most of the night. The simple explanation carried implications beyond its factual content. Jack had prioritized his son's emotional well-being above his own need for rest, despite physical injury and operational demands ahead. The paternal devotion, unconditional and unhesitating, contrasted sharply with Elizabeth's own experience of fatherhood. William Harrison had been a provider rather than a nurturer, financially generous but emotionally distant, invested in Elizabeth's achievements but rarely present for her struggles. The comparison with Jack's approach to parenthood revealed differences not just in style, but in fundamental understanding of responsibility. Coffee, Margaret offered, extending a steaming mug that Elizabeth accepted with grateful acknowledgement. As they settled at the kitchen table, Elizabeth turned her attention to the analysis David had transmitted overnight. The document detailed additional connections between the targeted pension funds, revealing a pattern even more disturbing than their initial assessment. This is systematic, she observed, professionals' focus temporarily overshadowing personal concerns. The fraud specifically targets funds with delayed withdrawal mechanisms and limited oversight structures. The methodology exploits regulatory gaps between federal and state jurisdiction. Her analytical skills identified the sophisticated strategy underlying the criminal enterprise. This isn't opportunistic theft. It's carefully designed extraction with minimal detection probability. Margaret nodded agreement, her own intelligence training recognizing the implications. And the targeting pattern suggests specific intention beyond financial gain. Military pensions, first responder benefits, civil service retirement systems, all essential personnel categories for national stability and emergency response. The assessment landed with seismic force. What had begun as Elizabeth's personal crisis, Marcus Reed's betrayal and fraudulent framing had expanded to reveal systematic targeting of funds, supporting the very people responsible for national protection and emergency response. That's not corporate crime, Jack stated, the flat certainty in his voice reflecting decades of security experience. That's asymmetric warfare, economic destabilization as prelude to more direct action. Margaret nodded agreement, professional recognition passing between them, which elevates our situation considerably. This isn't just about clearing Elizabeth's name or exposing financial fraud. It's potentially about national security. The implications expanded beyond anything Elizabeth had anticipated when she'd first discovered discrepancies in Meridian's transaction records. Her father's potential involvement, the personal betrayal that had seemed so devastating just hours ago, now paled against the broader conspiracy they appeared to have uncovered. What's our next move? She asked, executive instinct, asserting itself despite physical exhaustion and emotional turmoil. Margaret and Jack exchanged a brief glance, professional assessment passing between them without need for elaboration. We need to confront your father, Margaret stated, decisive shift from information gathering to operational planning. Not just for personal resolution, but tactical necessity. William Harrison either represents additional threat vector or potential asset depending on his actual involvement. Agreed, Jack added, tactical assessment aligning with Margaret's. His position provides access to both intelligence and resources we currently lack. Understanding his role clarifies our strategic options. Elizabeth felt momentary disorientation at their matter-of-fact discussion of confronting her father, the personal and professional colliding in ways her experience hadn't prepared her to navigate. Yet she recognized the tactical validity of their assessment despite emotional complications. He maintains a predictable schedule, she offered, providing operational intelligence rather than personal objection. Wednesday lunches at Hartford Club, minimal security presence, controlled environment that would facilitate private conversation. Today is Wednesday, Margaret noted, already transitioning to tactical planning. Creates immediate opportunity window, though compressed preparation timeframe. The club environment provides both advantages and vulnerabilities. Jack observed military assessment expanding on Elizabeth's information. Private setting limits surveillance options, but controlled access points create exposure risk during entry and exit. I can secure entry without difficulty, Elizabeth stated with corporate confidence. Family name guarantees access regardless of membership status. The primary vulnerability remains your public exposure. Margaret countered security assessment overriding social considerations. Your face is now known to read security resources. Movement through public spaces creates significant interception risk. Jack nodded agreement. Disguise protocols essential. Non-electronic transportation to minimize tracking vulnerability. Secondary roads rather than main thoroughfares. Their planning continued with professional efficiency, each contribution building upon previous elements to create comprehensive strategy. Margaret's intelligence background provided strategic framework. Jack's special operations experience contributed tactical implementation. Elizabeth's corporate knowledge offered environmental insights regarding her father's habits and the club's procedures. Ben remains here with secure oversight. Margaret decided the practical solution in acknowledging both operational necessity and the boy's safety. My contact arrives within our former colleague with appropriate training and resources. The decision visibly pained Jack despite its tactical soundness. The father's instinct to protect personally struggling against operational requirements that demanded his participation. It's the right call, Elizabeth said quietly, recognizing his conflict. He'll be safer here than anywhere else. Jack nodded once, accepting the assessment without further discussion. His weathered hand briefly touched the bandage on his leg, physical reminder of yesterday's threats that reinforced the wisdom of keeping Ben securely away from their confrontation with William Harrison. Move timeline 90 minutes. Margaret announced tactical schedule established. Full equipment check at 60 minutes. Communications protocol, verification at departure. As Margaret coordinated logistical details, Elizabeth found herself contemplating the extraordinary transformation of her circumstances. 5 days ago, she had been CEO of Meridian Capital Partners, operating in world of boardrooms and investment strategies. Now she prepared for covert approach to confront her father about potential involvement in criminal conspiracy, guided by a former special operator and intelligence officer, her survival dependent on people she hadn't known a week ago. Yet somehow this dangerous new reality felt more authentic than the carefully constructed world she had inhabited throughout her professional life. Here consequences were immediate rather than theoretical. Relationships formed through genuine necessity rather than strategic advantage. Decisions reflected core values rather than political calculation. Ben emerged from the guest room, his sleep-tousled appearance momentarily dissolving the operational tension. His presence, innocent childhood amid adult conspiracies, provided powerful reminder of what ultimately mattered beyond evidence and justice. Morning, sailor, Jack greeted his son with genuine warmth despite operational pressures. Sleep okay? Ben shrugged, the gesture remarkably similar to his father's typical response. Bad dreams, he admitted without elaboration, his gaze finding Elizabeth with evident relief. You're still here. The simple observation that her continued presence represented safety rather than danger in the child's mind touched Elizabeth deeply. Somehow in the space of 5 days, she had transitioned from stranger to trusted ally in Ben's worldview. Still here, she confirmed, matching his matter-of-fact tone. And your dad and I need to go somewhere today, but you'll be staying here with Margaret's friend, someone very good at keeping people safe. Ben absorbed this information with the solemn consideration of a child accustomed to difficult truths delivered honestly. Is it dangerous? Where you're going? Jack crouched to his son's level despite his injured leg, maintaining direct eye contact rather than offering false reassurance. Could be, he acknowledged, but we need to do it anyway. Sometimes the right things are the hardest things. Ben nodded, accepting this wisdom from the man whose judgment formed the foundation of his security. Like when Mom was sick and we still had to go to the hospital, even though it was scary. Exactly like that. Jack confirmed, his hand resting on his son's shoulder with gentle affection. Being brave isn't about not feeling afraid. It's about doing what needs done despite being afraid. The exchange, honest communication rather than protective deception, reinforced Elizabeth's admiration for Jack's parental approach. He respected his son enough to acknowledge reality while providing the security of consistent values and unwavering presence. As final preparations for their mission proceeded, Elizabeth found herself drawn to Ben, something compelling her to offer reassurance beyond tactical assessments or operational planning. "Hey," she said quietly, crouching awkwardly to match his height despite her injured ankle. "I want you to know something important." Ben regarded her with solemn attention, his expression reflecting awareness beyond his years. "Your dad is the most capable person I've ever met," Elizabeth continued, absolute conviction in her voice. "And we're going to be very careful today." Ben studied her face, searching for truth beyond adult reassurance. "Promise you'll bring him back?" He asked the question, revealing his deepest fear. The responsibility inherent in his request, this child asking her to ensure his father's safety, created momentary hesitation. Elizabeth had built her career on calculated promises, commitments made with careful assessment of probability and risk. But this was different. This was absolute trust from a child who had already lost one parent. "I promise," she replied, the words emerging with certainty beyond rational calculation. "We'll come back together." Ben nodded once, accepting her commitment with the simple faith of childhood. Then, with unexpected formality, he extended his hand toward her, not for handshake, but offering something clutched in his small fingers. "Another crane," he explained as Elizabeth accepted the origami creation. "Dad says two is better than one for really important missions." The small paper figure, carefully folded from notebook paper with childish precision, represented everything at stake beyond evidence and conspiracy. This boy's future, his father's survival, the family they had created from tragedy and love. "Thank you," Elizabeth said simply, carefully securing the second crane alongside the first in her pocket. "I'll keep them both safe." The arrival of Margaret's security contact, a quiet, watchful man, introduced only as Wilson shifted focus back to immediate operational matters. The handover briefing proceeded with professional efficiency, Margaret's instructions regarding Ben's safety detailed and uncompromising. Their departure from the cabin followed established security protocols, Margaret leading Jack, covering rear position, Elizabeth protected between them. The transportation Margaret had arranged, nondescript sedan with commercial registration, reflected her intelligence tradecraft, anonymous and untraceable. As they approached Hartford, following secondary roads rather than main highways, Elizabeth found herself mentally rehearsing potential scenarios for the confrontation ahead. What would she say to her father? How would she assess his reactions? What evidence would convince her of his guilt or innocence beyond emotional preference? "5 minutes to target," Margaret announced, her voice interrupting Elizabeth's thoughts. "Final confirmation of tactical positions and communication protocols." "Remember," Jack added quietly from beside her, "this isn't interrogation. It's controlled conversation to assess awareness and involvement. Let him establish narrative before introducing contradictory elements." The guidance reflected both his special operations experience and his understanding of Elizabeth's personal stake in this encounter. They needed information, but direct confrontation would likely produce defensive reaction rather than useful intelligence. The Hartford Club appeared ahead, its elegant facade projecting exactly the kind of understated wealth and traditional values William Harrison had always respected. Elizabeth felt momentary disorientation at approaching this familiar location under such extraordinary circumstances. "Ready?" Margaret asked from driver position, final verification before Elizabeth would proceed alone into the club while they maintained perimeter security. Elizabeth touched the paper cranes in her pocket, tangible reminders of promises made and people depending on her success. "Ready?" She confirmed, her voice steady despite the emotional complexity awaiting her inside. The club entrance reflected its exclusive nature, discreet signage, impeccable landscaping, attentive staff who recognized wealth and position without requiring explicit identification. Elizabeth approached with the assured entitlement of someone who belonged in such environments, her borrowed clothing and injured ankle notwithstanding. Ms. Harrison, the doorman greeted her with practiced deference. What an unexpected pleasure. Your father is in the main dining room. The easy admission, no questions about membership status or appointment verification, confirmed Elizabeth's assessment of the club's prioritization of historical association over technical requirements. The Harrison name opened doors regardless of formal protocols. Elizabeth moved through the familiar environment with deliberate casualness, maintaining awareness of surroundings while projecting social confidence. The club's interior reflected its traditional values. Dark wood paneling, leather furnishings, subdued lighting, creating atmosphere of privileged intimacy. She located her father immediately upon entering the dining room. William Harrison sat alone at his usual table corner position, providing both privacy and observational advantage, his preference unchanged over decades of patronage. His attention focused on financial documents spread before him, the familiar concentration excluding awareness of his surroundings. Elizabeth approached with measured steps, her injured ankle protesting, despite determination to maintain normal appearance. This confrontation, this potential revelation of fundamental truth deserved proper posture, regardless of physical discomfort. "Hello, Father," she said simply, her voice carrying across the short distance between them. William Harrison looked up sharply, surprise momentarily displacing his usual composed expression. "Elizabeth," he responded, recovering quickly to project cordial welcome. "This is unexpected." The understatement acknowledging neither her fugitive status nor the criminal accusations surrounding her reflected his lifelong approach to emotional complexity. Acknowledge facts without engaging feelings. Address situations without exploring implications. "May I join you?" Elizabeth asked, maintaining social protocol despite the extraordinary circumstances underlying this seemingly ordinary interaction. "Of course," William replied, gesturing to the adjacent chair with the impeccable manners that had always defined his public behavior. He studied her with careful assessment as she settled opposite him, his gaze noting details without revealing his conclusions. "You're injured." The observation, direct without being concerned, captured their relationship's fundamental dynamic. Factual acknowledgement without emotional engagement. Awareness without connection. "Sprained ankle," Elizabeth confirmed, matching his matter-of-fact tone. "Minor inconvenience." William nodded acceptance of this characterization, not pressing for details that might reveal the circumstances of her injury. His attention shifted to signal waiter for additional place-setting social propriety maintained, regardless of underlying tensions. "I presume this isn't purely social visit," he observed once they were alone again, his directness reflecting business rather than personal approach. "Given current circumstances—" "No," Elizabeth acknowledged, maintaining the careful conversational strategy Jack had outlined. "It's not social." William studied her with the same analytical assessment he applied to potential investments or business competitors. "You've discovered something," he stated rather than asked his perception, aligning with his reputation for business acumen. Elizabeth held his gaze, searching for indicators of awareness or deception in the familiar features that had shaped her understanding of authority throughout childhood. "I've discovered many things recently," she replied carefully. "The question is what you already know." The ambiguous response, neither direct accusation nor explicit question, created space for William to establish narrative direction. Jack's strategy providing framework for extracting information without triggering defensive reaction. William's expression revealed nothing as he considered his response, the measured calculation familiar from countless boardroom negotiations Elizabeth had witnessed throughout her professional development. "I know," he began with uncharacteristic hesitation, "that Marcus Reed has implemented systematic fraud within Meridian Capital. I know he has fabricated evidence implicating you as responsible party. And I know," his voice hardened slightly, "that his operation extends far beyond single firm or individual executive." The acknowledgement, confirming awareness without admitting complicity, represented significant intelligence without resolving the fundamental question of William's personal involvement. Elizabeth maintained neutral expression, despite the surge of both hope and suspicion his statement generated. "How long have you known?" she asked, simply the question designed to establish timeline rather than assign blame. William's posture shifted slightly, professional composure momentarily revealing genuine discomfort. "Too long," he admitted, unexpected regret coloring his typically confident voice. I discovered preliminary indicators approximately 14 months ago, pattern recognition across multiple pension fund performance metrics that suggested coordinated action rather than market-driven outcomes. And you didn't report these indicators because Elizabeth prompted, careful to maintain inquiry tone rather than accusatory demand. William's gaze met hers directly, something unfamiliar in his expression, not defensive justification, but something closer to genuine regret. Because initial investigation revealed connections to Sentinel's board members, people I've known for decades, trusted colleagues with significant influence over regulatory frameworks and enforcement mechanisms. The admission acknowledging awareness without actively participating created more questions than it answered. Elizabeth maintained disciplined focus despite emotional complexity threatening professional objectivity. You chose protection of colleagues over exposure of criminal activity, she stated rather than asked, her tone neutral despite the implicit judgment. I chose strategic patience over premature exposure. William corrected the distinction, reflecting his lifelong approach to complex problems. I needed comprehensive evidence before confronting individuals with sufficient resources to destroy accusers without substantive proof. The explanation, tactical rather than ethical, aligned with William Harrison's fundamental worldview. Effectiveness trumped idealism. Results justified methods. Strategic advantage outweighed immediate gratification. And Sentinel's identical transaction patterns, Elizabeth asked, introducing the most damning evidence without explicit accusation. The statistical impossibility of parallel methodologies developing independently across multiple firms. William's expression hardened. Professional mask temporarily replaced by genuine anger. Not identical, he corrected with unexpected intensity. Deliberately similar. Created to establish pattern recognition that would eventually expose the entire network. The claim that apparent complicity actually represented sophisticated counter-operations seemed both plausible and convenient. Elizabeth studied her father's face, searching for indicators of deception she had learned to recognize throughout their complex relationship. You're saying you deliberately replicated fraud patterns to expose broader conspiracy, she clarified, skepticism evident despite attempts at neutral inquiry. I'm saying I created controlled environment for documented evidence gathering. William replied, his tone reflecting impatience with semantic distinctions. No actual client funds diverted, no pension assets compromised, mirrored transaction structures with internal monitoring systems that documented every attempted extraction by external operatives. The explanation seemed simultaneously implausible and entirely consistent with William Harrison's strategic approach to complex problems. He had built his career on identifying systemic vulnerabilities, then exploiting them for competitive advantage. Why wouldn't he apply the same methodology to criminal conspiracy threatening his industry? Why not tell me? Elizabeth asked the question, emerging from personal hurt rather than strategic inquiry. When Marcus framed me, when my reputation was destroyed, when I was literally running for my life, why not simply explain what you were doing? William's expression shifted, professional calculation momentarily replaced by something resembling genuine regret. Because I couldn't be certain you weren't involved. He admitted, the painful truth emerging with evident difficulty. The evidence against you appeared compelling. Marcus had documents with your digital signature, witnesses confirming your direction, transaction records bearing your authorization codes. The admission that her own father had considered her potentially guilty created sharp pain despite its rational justification. Elizabeth maintained professional composure despite emotional turmoil, focusing on intelligence gathering rather than personal reaction. And now she asked the question, considering both his current assessment of her innocence and his operational intentions moving forward. William studied her with the analytical thoroughness that had defined their relationship from her childhood assessment rather than affection evaluation, rather than emotional connection. Now, I know you discovered the fraud independently, he stated with evident certainty. Your actions since discovery reflect investigation rather than cover-up. Your association with Jack Thompson and subsequent movements suggests legitimate effort to expose conspiracy rather than protect personal involvement. Elizabeth felt momentary disorientation at her father's knowledge of Jack information that should have been impossible to obtain given their careful operational security. You've been tracking me, She realized the implication, expanding her understanding of both her father's resources and his intentions. William nodded once, neither apologetic nor defensive about the surveillance. Since your disappearance from New York. Not continuously, but sufficiently to establish behavior patterns inconsistent with guilty participation. The revelation should have felt invasive, a violation of privacy and operational security both. Yet Elizabeth found herself experiencing unexpected relief. Her father had been watching over her in his own detached and strategic way throughout her ordeal. So what happens now, she asked, executive directness reasserting itself as emotional complexity threatened to overwhelm their limited time frame. William's response emerged with the decisive clarity that had defined his business career. We consolidate evidence, identify remaining network vulnerabilities, and implement coordinated exposure through multiple enforcement channels simultaneously. His expression hardened with genuine determination. We destroy them completely beyond recovery or retaliation capacity. The plan reflected William Harrison's fundamental approach to adversaries, not merely defeat, but systematic elimination of future threat potential. No half measures, no compromise, no mercy for those who had targeted his industry, and by extension, his daughter. I have associates already positioned within key regulatory agencies. He continued operational details, reflecting months of preparation. Evidence packages prepared for synchronized delivery across jurisdictional boundaries. Implementation awaits only final confirmation of network boundaries and participant identification. The sophisticated counter-operation apparently developed and maintained independently by her father, without official sanction, both impressed and concerned Elizabeth. William Harrison had created parallel justice system operating outside established legal frameworks, justified by effectiveness rather than procedural legitimacy. And Marcus Elizabeth asked personal vengeance momentarily overshadowing larger strategic considerations. William's expression transformed corporate calculation replaced by something darker and more primal. Marcus Reed will never practice financial management again, he stated with absolute certainty. His assets are already frozen through back-channel mechanisms. His reputation systematically dismantled through carefully planted information. His future prospects eliminated through permanent digital footprints that will follow any search of his name. The ruthless destruction, personal and professional annihilation, rather than mere legal consequences, reflected paternal protection Elizabeth had rarely experienced directly from her emotionally reserved father. William Harrison might not express affection conventionally, but his response to threats against his daughter demonstrated commitment beyond professional alliance. You've been busy, Elizabeth observed, reassessing her understanding of both her father and his operational capabilities. We protect what matters. William replied simply, the phrase creating unexpected echo of Jack's words from the previous night. The parallel between these men, so different in background and approach, yet somehow aligned in fundamental values, struck Elizabeth with surprising force. Both protected what mattered through different methodologies, but similar determination. Both operated according to internal codes that transcended conventional frameworks. Both would destroy threats to those under their protection without hesitation or regret. I have associates waiting, Elizabeth said, executive decisiveness returning as personal reconciliation gave way to operational necessity. People with evidence that will complement yours. People with specialized capabilities relevant to immediate security concerns. William nodded once tactical assessment immediately adapting to new intelligence. Bring them in, he directed without hesitation. We consolidate resources immediately. Operational timeline accelerated to prevent further network activity or evidence degradation. The immediate acceptance incorporating Elizabeth's allies without questioning their identities or motivations represented significant departure from William Harrison's typically cautious approach to new variables. His trust in her judgment demonstrated respect beyond their previous professional relationship. They're outside, Elizabeth confirmed, already rising to implement this unexpected integration of resources. I'll bring them directly. As she moved toward the club entrance, Elizabeth found herself experiencing emotional complexity beyond simple relief at her father's apparent innocence. William Harrison had operated according to his own strategic assessment, implementing counter-conspiracy without official sanction or oversight. His methods reflected effectiveness, prioritized over conventional legitimacy. His protection extended to his daughter, but not necessarily to broader ethical considerations. Was this vindication or simply confirmation of the moral complexity she had always sensed beneath her father's carefully maintained professional exterior? The question remained unresolved as Elizabeth approached the club entrance, where Jack and Margaret waited with cautious vigilance. "He's clean," she informed them, without preamble, the simplified assessment masking more complex reality. "More than clean, he's been running counter-operation for months. Documented evidence, regulatory contacts, implementation framework already established." Jack's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts, tactical assessment overriding personal reaction. Verification. He asked simply the single word encompassing complex requirements for evidence beyond emotional preference. "He knew about you," Elizabeth replied, the implicit surveillance capabilities representing significant operational resources. "Tracked my movements since leaving New York. Established behavior patterns confirming innocence rather than complicity." Margaret absorbed this intelligence with professional neutrality, neither accepting nor rejecting without further verification. "Direct conversation preferred," she stated, rather than requested. "Personal assessment of operational capabilities and strategic alignment." "He's expecting us," Elizabeth confirmed, leading them toward the club entrance with renewed confidence despite lingering complexities. The merger of these separate operational groups, William Harrison's corporate counter-conspiracy, Margaret Sullivan's intelligence resources, Jack Thompson's tactical capabilities, and Elizabeth's position connecting all three, created potential force disproportionate to their individual components. As they approached her father's table, Elizabeth found herself contemplating the extraordinary convergence of circumstances that had brought these unlikely allies together against common threat. The elite financial executive, the retired intelligence officer, the former special operator turned small-town electrician, each bringing distinct capabilities and perspectives to shared mission. William Harrison rose as they approached professional courtesy, masking tactical assessment as he evaluated these new variables. His gaze moved efficiently between Jack and Margaret, clearly identifying their backgrounds and capabilities through subtle indicators civilians would have missed entirely. "Mr. Thompson," he acknowledged with slight nod toward Jack. "Colonel Sullivan." The recognition, immediate and accurate despite lack of introduction, demonstrated information resources beyond ordinary corporate capabilities. Jack maintained neutral expression. Despite this confirmation of surveillance capabilities, his tactical assessment continuing beneath professional exterior. "Mr. Harrison," he replied, the simple acknowledgement conveying neither trust nor suspicion. "Interesting operation you have been running." "Necessary response to extraordinary threat." William countered, no apology in his tone or posture. "Conventional channels compromised. Alternative methodologies required." Margaret studied William with the penetrating assessment of someone trained to evaluate both strategic capabilities and personal truthfulness. "Coordination with official channels." She inquired the question, testing both operational legitimacy and potential vulnerabilities. "Selective engagement with verified assets." William replied, the careful phrasing acknowledging limited rather than comprehensive official sanction. "Compartmentalized information distribution to prevent network penetration or evidence contamination." The exchange continued with increasing technical detail, financial mechanisms, intelligence verification protocols, tactical response options, as these professionals from different worlds established common operational framework. Elizabeth observed their interaction with growing appreciation for the distinct capabilities each brought to their shared mission. William Harrison provided institutional knowledge and regulatory access necessary for systematic exposure of the conspiracy. Margaret Sullivan contributed intelligence tradecraft and verification methodologies essential for evidence validation. Jack Thompson offered tactical assessment and security protocols required for physical protection during final operational phase. Together, they represented formidable response to the criminal network that had targeted Elizabeth, a convergence of capabilities greater than any individual component could have achieved independently. As their planning session concluded, William Harrison rose with the decisive authority that had defined his business career. Implementation timeline, 24 hours. He announced the schedule reflecting operational necessity rather than arbitrary deadline. Evidence packages distributed through secure channels. Regulatory actions coordinated across jurisdictional boundaries. Network isolation protocols activated to prevent asset flight or evidence destruction. The comprehensive response, systematic rather than incremental, coordinated rather than piecemeal, reflected William Harrison's fundamental approach to adversaries. Total commitment, complete resolution, permanent elimination of threat potential,